partner with to bring a Topgolf type operation to any one of our city golf courses. We have had some discussions with Topgolf to figure out how can we take their customers who in large part are non-golfers. They're going there for entertainment value, for the food and beverage, but they're being exposed to golf. So how can we take their customers and get them outdoors on our golf courses? So we've started that discussion with them. Obviously, they're a private company, and so they have to decide whether or not it's beneficial for them. I think in terms of our golf system, well, we may not put in a Topgolf type operation. I do think we have some opportunities to create that type of entertainment with Nibley, which is far removed from any other driving range, basically in the valley. So we really are catering to the northeast part of the valley and specifically Salt Lake City residents. We can expand that driving range. We can expand the operations to compete against Golf in the Round and Topgolf with that driving range. We could do the same thing with Glendale. Both of those opportunities, though, require investment. So we would have to either do some type of private-public partnership, or we would have to, as a city, decide that that's an investment that we want to make. And that's kind of my, I guess my default position is, why would we turn something over to a private entity to let them take the profits when we could do the same thing if we choose to make the investment as a city and operate it and keep the profits within the city?
You know, and I'm just doing a follow-up, Mr. Chair, and that's the reason why I bring it up, Dan, is just because we see golf courses in the wintertime and they're not being used. Now, of course not today, but when the snow flies, at least with Topgolf, it's something that people actually go to. You have different revenue sources through liquor or through food, and then the driving range itself. But, I mean, we are not monopolizing at all our potential with our courses.
I agree.
Charlie.
Yeah, thank you. And Dan, thank you. I enjoyed the time that we spent. It's been a few months
Yes.
up at Bonneville, so thank you for that. So James brought up Topgolf. I need to fully disclose that I came home from work last summer, and my wife told me that she had just signed my son up for golf lessons at Topgolf. And we had quite the discussion, since I had to remind her that we as a council had spent almost a year diving into golf. And I asked her, what the deal was, and she's like, well, his friends were all going to do this. And there was a marketing campaign that went through the school that created this opportunity for kids to go out. And so, being a Salt Lake City council person who was very, very involved in the golf dialogue that we had a couple of years ago, it was really surprising to me that my son was being exposed to golf.
Charlie, I got to jump in and tell you, even though I was on the golf subcommittee, I do not know what Topgolf is.
Okay,
and I bet there are people who are listening to this who do not know.
Well, my son was 11 and he knew, and so but the thing is, they're actively marketing to.
So tell me what it is.
Younger groups. So it's this a private deal. It's more of a driving range, similar to Asian driving ranges that you'll see in Seoul and places that are incredibly densely populated where you don't have a lot of land. It was a different opportunity here, where you shoot at targets and things like that. You golf, but it's not going from hole to hole to hole. So I guess one of the things that we had talked about as a council when we were coming up with policy, and I wanted to wait to speak until Aaron came back, because I want everyone to take out notes that I actually completely agree with Aaron on this point. So everyone note that.
Get out the champagne.
Yes, it does happen. No, but seriously, we spent almost a year as a council going over and really digging into the issue of golf and policy and coming up with different things. I kind of had the same thoughts when I was reading through the A through H. When you guys were putting this together, how much did you review the policies that we had gone through about 2 years ago? Did that factor into coming up with these suggestions?
Are you talking about the guiding principles?
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, I've done a few things with the guiding principles, including applying those guiding principles to various business models, as well as looking at strategies that would apply to each one of those guiding principles and what the benefits to the community might be, also what the challenges. And I think in a lot of cases it takes a philosophical and possibly a policy change, because there are some conflicting guiding principles in terms of whether or not we're operating to generate a profit or a positive cash flow, or whether we're operating to provide a community benefit. So we've taken those very seriously. One thing I would mention is that through the development of this this legislative intent and our response, we didn't include our thinking, a lot of our thinking and the work that we've been doing on the future, on what our plans are, because we're working through that with the FY18 budget. And our intent is to provide that plan or those options to first the mayor and then ultimately to the council. So this response is really just was targeted on what happened in 2016 with demand pricing, what are some of the challenges with the golf division, and setting the stage for we need to make some changes, we need to make some improvements. But we do have some thoughts on where we could potentially take the golf division or golf or even the properties that the golf courses reside on.
Okay, because one of the things that I would really like to see when you all come back are some of the things that you're thinking in terms of the public-private partnerships. I understand that, you know, with what you just said, that, you know, there's a concern about the public-private partnerships because the private entity would want to take the profit that comes out of this, and we could invest in it. When we were talking about this at length, I am just concerned that I don't think there's money in the general fund that I would be comfortable prioritizing and moving from one area to over to the enterprise fund to come up with that. I get that, you know, in a perfect world, if we were awash with money, you know, that would make the most sense. It would make the most sense to do it ourselves and invest the money. But we don't have, I mean, it's not like there's a pot of money in the general fund. We would have to cut something else and pull from something else. And in prioritization, I just don't know if I could get to the point where I personally would be comfortable taking money from an area that would be critical and putting it towards the enterprise fund in order to right size or get something in a place where they can start making a profit. So what I would like to see are some of the different options and ideas that you have for public-private partnerships with, you know, and this has absolutely nothing to do with your staff. I think your staff are phenomenal. The pros that I talk to, everyone out on the courses, you have really good staff. The question, though, is when you're talking about, you know, having to do things differently, do we need to look at a different operations model and what some of those potential operations models could look like? My preference, of course, would be to keep all of, you know, the city staff and work something out. But, you know, we need to your point, you know, we can't continue to do the same thing that we've been doing because it's clearly not working. The hole that we've dug is just getting deeper and deeper. So I'd like to see some of the, you know, the different operations models that we could look at. The other thing that we had talked about was looking and having open discussions with Salt Lake County, and potentially partnering with Salt Lake County to not merge, but, you know, we would still maintain the asset, but have Salt Lake County incorporate it into their model, or us incorporate with them, so that we're not having, you know, Salt Lake County competing with what we're doing, that instead, you know, whether it's a joint agreement or something, that we really delve into what we can look at with either Salt Lake County or another, or, you know, it could be Davis County for all I care. I mean, I just want to look at other options so that we can keep the courses going. I've been, you know, very outspoken that I am supportive of golf. I want to keep the courses going. I want to make sure that we provide the best possible service, but based on the year that we as a council spent digging into this issue, we can't continue to do the same thing. And I think that while, there's been a lot of stuff in flux this past year, we're to the point now where I think we've stretched it, as, you guys have stretched it as far as you possibly can. And we need to have some concrete options that we as policymakers can look at that strongly take into consideration the policy direction that we've given in the past. Because true, we can change policy. We can decide, well, what we will fund it with general fund. I, for one, am not supportive of that. My colleagues, I don't know where they are because we haven't had that discussion. But we need to have some of those options that at least match up with some of the policy direction that we've given in the past. So, Mr. Chair, before we reschedule this, I'd like to ensure that you all have enough time to put those questions together, the questions that my colleagues have already asked and my colleagues will continue to ask. So, but seriously, I think you're great. I think you're thinking differently about this than we have in the past. I think your staff are all willing to, everyone wants to keep golf moving forward. I want to keep golf moving forward, but we have to change the way we're doing it and what that means, how it looks. That's where we're really looking to you. But in terms of looking to us to invest money from the general fund, I just don't think that's realistic, just being honest. So, thank you.
Derek, and then Andrew, and then Aaron.
Thanks for coming, Dan. Man, I'll tell you, it's a good thing that I don't have any hair because I'd be pulling it out right now. This has been the most frustrating conversation I've had on my time on council so far.
And you missed the year of policy discussions.
When I was reading our packet, I was reading through these guiding principles, which I stand by. This was done by a former council, but I'm glad that I wasn't here for this. But I appreciate the work that you all put into this. But I just can't have another conversation about golf when there's so many more important issues in our city. To me, this is a no-brainer. We should figure out a way to keep a few of the golf courses open, shift around the rest of the open space, repurpose it, and find a way to make this, run in the black. I cannot imagine spending more time on this issue. We've got to figure out a resolution, close it, and be done with it. James, you mentioned something about, we all want to keep golf going. I actually don't. I don't really care. I want this to be financially responsible. I want us to focus less on such a small demographic of our population and instead look to repurposing this for a much wider user group, people who I would be happy to float this as open space. I would be happy to float it with general fund dollars if this were to address recreation for a broader spectrum of our residents in the community. But just to continue to spin our wheels on this ridiculous issue, we should just make a decision, have the administration bring us a proposal that we can all get behind, and then move forward. I appreciate the work you've put into this. I'm glad that you're here. But we just can't waste any more time, you guys.
Thanks, Derek. I wish you were more comfortable sharing how you really feel. Yeah, but I do appreciate it. I'm not trying to make light of it, Derek. Andrew.
I don't know how I follow that, Derek. A couple. I disagree with Derek. I don't think it's a small issue. I think there are people it's a big issue for, just as much as parks or dog parks or anything else are a big issue for certain parts of the population. That being said, a couple specific questions. Earlier on, you said that the courses themselves, all 6 of them, are profitable if you exclude admin costs. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Which admin costs are you referring to?
Well, it's a combination of, we have about, off the top of my head, I want to say we have about $400,000 worth of golf enterprise fund admin, which is basically my cost, Matt's costs, our admin. We have 5 of us in our admin staff that basically do things for the golf courses, like our tee sheet reservation system, our marketing, our accounting, our human resources, our hiring. We hire anywhere from 50 to 100 employees every year as seasonal and hourly. So we're doing that in our golf administrative staff. We also have about $370,000 in city administrative charges and allocations for things like legal, again, human resources, finance, all of those things that a typical enterprise fund or other departments pay for.
So you're talking about $775,000 in admin costs you're thinking about.
Yeah.
Yourself included, as well as city services that are shared with other departments across the city.
Correct.
How much of that would you propose cutting?
Well, over time, I could see us cutting close to 80% of those costs out. If we immediately, it's going to be hard to transition the golf enterprise administrative costs to the golf courses. That's where some of the accountability and some of the added responsibilities lay. In terms of city charges, one thing that the way I look at it, and I'm not developing policy here, but if we go to the county and we have them operate our golf courses, or we go to a private management system, what happens to the $370,000 that we're paying the city right now? Either we have to work that into a contract and have that private entity pay the city for the operation, or it gets pushed back to the rest of the departments. So in theory, those costs can be just absorbed by the general fund right now and not charged to the golf enterprise, and it wouldn't affect the golf operations. So if we didn't have those charges, each golf course would continue to operate like we are today and make a profit.
Well, we can say that about other things in the city, though. If we took away admin costs, we could cut a lot of the city expenses, but we're still left with legal liability without legal services or whatever else you're getting from the city. My concern about pulling those apart again is that we're recreating past discussions and saying, well, if we didn't have a water cost, if we didn't have a break in the line, if we didn't have a bad weather year, if we didn't have this, it'd be okay. And I'm hoping we're moving away from that sort of type of discussion, saying there's some fundamental bedrock stuff you're talking about which we need to address in the golf fund. It's not a one-off year issue. It's not a one particular issue with a broken pipe or 3 staff members, whatever it is. The second piece about when you push down accountability to the golf course level, what is the accountability we'd be looking for in your estimation? Because if I'm running Glendale Golf Course and you're saying, all right, you have the responsibility to make that profitable in 3 years, period, or what's the accountability, I guess, in your mind here?
Yeah, the accountability is exactly that. It's performance management and basically P&L, profit and loss at each golf course, and having a clear path to who's responsible for that. Is it the head golf professional? Is it golf superintendent? Is it a combination of the team that runs the golf course? Currently, we don't have those performance metrics in place.
Because as I understood it, we had 2 tiers of golf courses. We had some golf courses that could make money in the market as they are standing now, and some that couldn't necessarily. They may break even, but at best, but at least one of them wasn't going to, period. If we're going to keep it open, it had to be a public benefit discussion. And so are you talking about that, pulling those apart and saying there's some that we're going to say, you make a profit or you're fired because you should be able to do that, and some that we're saying you can't make a profit, we're going to have a different set of rules for you?
No,
One model we sort of talked about, but
yeah, I would expect the same performance management, basic performance management for every golf course, whether or not they were in, say, a general fund under a parks type operation, or they were funded by or supported by the general fund. There's still going to be a requirement to generate as much revenue as we can possibly generate, at the same time control expenses. There may be a difference in that some golf courses may not have the same opportunity to be profitable, and so we may put a performance metric on there that has more to do with having a public benefit. So the example I would use, it'd be Rose Park is less likely because of its location to be able to command enough demand out there in the market to be a profitable golf course, but it is an anchor to the community and it's a public benefit. Mountaindale has a tremendous opportunity to be profitable. So they might have different some different performance metrics, but both of them would still have a charge to generate as much revenue as they could within their specific purpose in the market.
Second question is a follow-up to your report that said that basically demand pricing has little or no impact at this point because while rounds increase, kind of revenue per round and overall revenues have decreased. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, I believe, and again, we only had one full season of basically testing that demand pricing strategy, but what we've seen from 2016 is, one, it caused a bit of confusion in the market in terms of pricing. As somebody was trying to decide where they're going to play golf, they don't know whether or not they should come out before noon or afternoon and on a Friday or on a Saturday. And we ran 4 focus groups with customers to ask them how do they view golf, how do they decide where to play golf. And in some cases, they didn't like the have to make that decision. They just want to show up to the golf course and know that the price is going to be competitive and it's going to be a stable price. In other cases, because of the demand pricing, we actually, I think, chased customers to a lower price option. So those customers that decided that were traditionally playing on a Friday morning, say, or a Saturday morning, when they saw higher prices on those days, those times, they decided to play on Wednesdays at a lower cost. So there would be that impact. And then at the same time of demand pricing, we changed our loyalty pricing, which I think had the most impact because we had a loyal following of customers, especially our seniors, and some of them decided that they were going to go play golf elsewhere because there wasn't a significant enough discount on our loyalty program anymore, so they stopped participating in it.
That's the hit that Bonneville took, you think?
I think Bonneville didn't take as much of that hit as some of the other courses. I think Bonneville took the hit from the construction of the irrigation system, and it's still recovering from that time. I think there's still some perception of people who go play Bonneville that they say, well, because we reduced the maintained turf, that they don't like that. But I think we can get those customers back. So I think that was the big case with Bonneville.
Andrew, can I jump in on this part when we're talking about that pricing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just, is that
If
okay?
that's okay with the chair?
Mr. Chair, is that okay? While we're on that issue, I just, do you have a plan for trying to recapture those folks who always played on Friday afternoon at Bonneville and then they switched because they didn't like it, or the people who were the loyalty members who have gone away? Do you have a way to recapture them again? And so I gather you're not going with that plan for this next golf season.
Correct. We through the pricing focus groups and through conversation, a lot of conversation and planning meetings with our head golf professionals, our assistant golf professionals, and our superintendents, we've come up with a different pricing strategy that we're actually prepared to submit. We would like to submit to the council. We'll go through the proper channels and get approval from the council before this season starts. So it'll be before our plan and before our FY18 budget. That pricing strategy has, it looks a lot more like, say, our competitors where we have a stable price 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, but we have a more significant discount for those customers who play more than 15 times a year, so that we keep them coming back.
And what is your plan to get the people back who've left? Is it just that pricing strategy, or are you doing an outreach of some sort to those folks?
Part of it is pricing strategy. We have 38,000 people on our email distribution list, and we have basically an industry-leading golf app, so that we can use social media to reach out to our customers. And then another big part, back to course level accountability, is to require and our golf staff to use more word of mouth. One thing we found from our pricing focus groups is that many of our customers don't realize what we're actually offering because they're not looking online and they're not even reading the emails that we send or the texts.
They don't have email accounts,
Yeah.
some of them.
And so when a customer comes in to our golf shop, we want our staff to be upselling them to our loyalty program, to our golf passes. We want them to be providing the highest level of customer service so that they return. So that's part of the strategy.
Are you going to do the fall special again then as part of that, or you don't know yet?
We may do a fall special. We not likely do the fall special that we had this year. Part of it was a test. We wanted to see how price sensitive our customers were, and they're price sensitive. So we saw play go up a pretty good amount for basically a 2.5 month period. We did have great weather in the fall, so it was really good golfing weather, and that's going to be a part of it. But despite the fact that the play went up, our revenues were down. So we priced it too low if our goal is to be in the black. So if we do a fall special like that again, it'll be with a little bit higher price. One of the other strategies we did the fall special this year was to build momentum for 2017, because we had seen play deteriorate over the course of 2016, partly because of maybe the pricing strategy, the demand pricing strategy, partly because of course conditions at Bonneville and
It was really hot also.
Rose Park. And in the middle of the summer, it was hot. And so we saw more of and the feedback we were getting, we saw more customers either regularly going to our competition or at least trying our competition. So we wanted to bring them back into our system. And one way to do that is to motivate them through a price and get them exposure to the great course conditions that we had.
Everyone loves a deal. I think that's proven. Everyone loves to feel like they're getting a deal. Are you going to do your program where if you bought a gift certificate, you get 9 holes free for $100 expenditure, that thing again? Because that was in a Christmas stocking at my house, that gift card.
And I will give huge credit to Matt and to Cody Sheldon, our administrative staff. On Black Friday, Matt will probably have to correct me, but we sold almost $100,000 worth of gift cards in one day.
I purchased one of them, just so you
That's
know.
pretty.
Supporting.
It was a good deal, but that's pretty significant for a golf operation that's closed basically at the end of November, for people to pay attention, and it's a testament
So
to
are
account.
you going
Oh,
to
Lisa.
do that again? And then it's Andrew's turn.
Okay. I was going to say,
All
because
the
I am coming
pricing-
back to you.
Sorry, all the pricing things there are out of the way.
And I'm hearing that we're going to see a pricing proposal for next season.
Correct.
Andrew.
Sure. Just 2 more questions, it's okay. Is there talking about the admin costs and trying to move it more to a performance-based measure for each golf course, is there a contradiction in wanting to decrease an admin sort of centralization of marketing or other sort of resources that they all share and probably do it more effectively on a grander scale, while decreasing that and trying to force down to the golf course level to do their marketing? Because we're trying to increase all of it, and that means changing perception, as part of your report said. Major perception shift. Any contradiction in those kind of places in your thinking?
Well, in terms of admin costs, what I would like to see is a direct charge versus allocations. And so part of one of our thinking in terms of a possibility, an option for changing the golf operation or the golf division operating model, it would be to carve out certain golf courses and make them part of the golf enterprise, and then a couple of golf courses and make them maybe a district level community amenity where their revenues cover most of their expenses. And then maybe the example would be using Rose Park and combining it with other city amenities like the Regional Athletic Complex and the Jordan River Par 3 to gain some cost advantages to maintaining that property. And then also still generating some revenue. Along the way, we would have a more centralized administrative function that is directly supporting each of those areas, and the costs that each of those areas incur are related to their operations and not just a kind of a blanket allocation.
Okay.
I don't know if that answers the question or not, but.
Yeah, and the follow-up to that is about the idea of general fund subsidy, either for all or part of the golf courses. If that's not on the table, if the council policy position is there will not be a general fund subsidy period for golf courses, how does that change your thinking or recommendations or the things you put forward?
I think it's actually a little bit of a slippery slope. It's not huge, but for example, and I think the best way to talk about it is just use examples. If we were to close the golf course that is in the red the most, Rose Park. Yeah, the city actually incurs more costs, because to repurpose that as a park, we're still going to have basically most of the operating costs we have to maintain it.
Sure, we had the discussion, I mean, 2-3 years ago, the same thing with Glendale. I mean, this
Yeah.
is a recreation of that. But does that change your thinking if there's no general fund subsidy, not about what you do, but how does that look for you as running the golf courses as a whole in your thinking or the planning or what you're thinking about?
If there's no general fund subsidy, it's outside of selling land, it's going to be really difficult to get an entity into the Salt Lake City Golf division that will be willing to provide the capital required to make investment in the golf courses to change the product. So really, it leaves us with, we likely will close golf courses. So if the question is, what will you do from a business standpoint if there's no general fund subsidy, we're going to close a golf course or two.
Because you can't bridge the gap between now and whatever plans you would have for a private entity to come in?
Well, that depends on the time. If we had a 10-year time horizon, I think we may have the opportunity to turn the golf division around with some investment. Without that investment or without that time horizon, if it's a 3-year, I don't see any clear path for us to turn the whole operation around and be profitable.
So a general fund subsidy would be an ability to reinvest in this courses to attract potentially private investment in them, or is it just to keep it afloat for enough time to attract private? How do you look at it, a general fund subsidy in that way?
I think for the next 3 years, a general fund investment is to keep our operations afloat while we basically reorganize the golf and put in a new business model for the golf operation. But I think long-term, there will be a golf course or two that we may want to consider as a city, that they're community amenities, like a park that generates revenue, that the general fund will always have some support for. And that's getting back to the enterprise fund. If we would to take 3 golf courses or 4 golf courses and select them as the enterprise fund, we could carry a positive cash flow balance, and I believe we could fund our capital improvements for those 4 golf courses. But right now, those 3 or 4 golf courses are funding the operations of the other golf courses.
Okay. Thank you.
Aaron.
I just keep coming back here. This has been a great discussion. Derek, it's fascinating to hear where you stand on this, and it reminds me that it's been a long time since we've had golf in front of us, and I think it's your first time in front of us in this format, Dan.
Correct, yes.
And I wanted to give a little bit of context that I know you must have been told about, but that for a decade, essentially, Golf Fund kept coming to the council at every budget year and saying, we need money from general fund for capital improvements and deferred maintenance. And every year the council basically said, go figure something out. And they didn't. And it came to a boiling point 2-3 years ago. And that's where I think the council really started to have to draw a line in the sand and require some greater accountability than it had seen before. And that's where the guiding principles came out of. We are, as you can tell, I think we have, Derek might already have post-traumatic stress disorder from this experience, and he wasn't even here 2.5 years ago for the 18 months we suffered through. We aren't really warm to giving general fund money, and so I'm telling you really clearly, don't come to us asking for general fund money. We're not going to give it to you. That's my opinion. And if when it comes time for a straw poll, I want a straw poll. And we'll say it again. Do we want to give general fund money? And I think your answer is going to be no. So let's not waste a year going through a budget process that's asking for something that isn't going to happen, that we've been very clear about. Let's get changes going. And I think that you are a very capable person to bring those kind of flipping status quo changes. And I hear your answer to Andrew and what that probably means. And I know that what that means to the Rose Park community is not something that anyone really wants to have happen. And we have had the discussions about the cost of maintaining recreation space, and that it's the same space. We still have to take care of it. But that's a value judgment that we as policymakers make. And we've been pretty clear about that. So the 10-year time horizon of being able to get the fund on its feet, when you say 10 years, I just look back 10 years and think about, gosh, I wish you would have been sitting in front of us 10 years ago when there was a lot more patience from this body. And none of us were here then, but here we are, a result of that. I'm going to leave it there. Thanks.
Lisa, any other questions or comments? So, Dan, I just have a couple. Clearly, we're all experiencing a little bit of deja vu all over again. I think you're hearing that in our frustration that I think I would echo that. Personally, I'm not interested in a general fund subsidy. I think we have some real challenging precedents that creates for us that I'm not willing to go to by somehow subsidizing one enterprise fund and not others. We consistently have this conversation around water, even for parks, and it's a pretty big slippery slope, and I'm not interested in starting down that slope. So I think what's important for us, and what I think you've heard, but I'll try to summarize, is that we are committed to those guiding principles, and that if there's some clarification that you would like to see from us please identify that, and I think we can review that, and so that could come back to us for clarification if you'd like. I'm particularly interested in looking at solutions that are new and innovative. I think that's partly why you're here. And I'm really concerned about what I think I'm hearing, and I haven't been able to get my brain around this idea that there may be some opportunity to contract the management of our golf system out, even if that's to the county or to some private entity, but there would be some profit revenue generated from that, and we don't want to give that up. So it's kind of like, well, either or. Frankly, I think I'd be willing to give up a little bit of profit if we could recoup something, or in some process improve our golf system in that way. So it's very much a policy conversation, and I think the expectation I would have is that we have that policy discussion. And the other thing I keep hearing that concerns me is this idea that we're losing people to our competition. I don't know that a public entity is in the business of recruiting people away from the competition. That's concerning to me, and I think there's a philosophical issue about, are we out there to compete with either other municipalities or the private golf system, or is our role to provide a benefit and amenity to our residents? And I don't know that we're reconciled on that. I'm certainly conflicted about that as well. And when I consistently hear, and I've been in this longer than anybody, that we're losing people to the competition, I kind of want to say, we shouldn't be in competition. That's not our role. That's not our government role, to compete with private or other municipalities. So that's going to have to be reframed for me, because it's not a selling point to say that we can recruit back from other entities. So any additional questions or guidance you want to provide for some follow-up? I think I'll have to check with Cindy, but I think we can schedule this for the 1st of March. I'd want to give plenty of lead time as you go into your budget process, so that you really have a clear understanding of where we are and what's viable and what's not. Yes, James.
Stan, I just want to clarify something. I thought you were going to touch on this. I just wanted to make sure that staff here knows that instead of closing a course before searching out for private businesses or the county to look at it, we need to have that discussion way before we're even discussing closing courses. At least that's my personal opinion. For us to say we're going to close courses if one of them, without even having that discussion with reaching out, we're just going to continue to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Thanks, James. Anything else? So one of the challenges that I've seen for me personally over this entire conversation, and I mean going back 8-10 years, is that we are consistently confronted with information on a national level that says golf is declining, and then we keep talking about how we're going to reinvigorate our golf program. And one of the challenges I think before you, Dan, is I have not yet seen any proposal back to us that addresses a decline and that reconciliation with how we're going to turn that around. And if we truly are seeing a national decline, that's a losing battle, and I don't think we can do anything long-term to change that. We can do some short-term things, but not long-term. If you have some proposal in a 10-year time frame or whatever time frame is realistic for you that is convincing and suggests that the city can buck that national trend, I want to see it, and I want to see it in a way that feels like it's compelling. But right now I just feel like we are continually, I've always felt like we're just being asked to trust us. Something's going to get different. Well, the evidence is to the contrary. So,
Mr. Chair, that brings up the point, because in the report, though, you say very specifically that's not true. So
Yeah.
we have competing sort of.
I just have,
essentially,
if
what
I may,
sort
I
of-
have a couple of comments on that. One is we have engaged in a consultant. The council approved in the FY17 budget an amount for us to hire a consultant. So we've hired a consultant out of Denver, THK and Associates, to basically conduct a benchmarking and market potential study. And they'll look at the trade market that we're operating in, and they'll give us an idea of current and future what that potential looks like for attracting golf customers. We're in a good spot in that we have 6 golf courses, and the whole valley is planned to grow over the next 20 years. So just by pure population growth, we're likely to see a favorable demand for our golf courses. The golf industry as a whole, nationwide, has actually flattened or hit the bottom, I should say, from the recession. And it's the word that we're getting is it may be starting to come back. One indicator of that might be, and this is completely anecdotal, but over the weekend there was a professional golf tournament in Arizona, and it's just interesting to know that on one single hole there were 250,000 people in the stands watching that one hole, the golf on that one hole, which is more than twice the number that was at the Super Bowl. And at that golf tournament, there were 650,000 fans that attended a 4-day golf tournament. If we can somehow figure out how to turn those fans into golfers, then the golf industry will increase. And so that's our challenge, and it's not an automatic, but from my perspective, I don't see golf declining. I actually see golf rebounding from its period of lull.
and Dan, what I'm suggesting is, I've been hearing that for 10 years.
Oh, okay.
So don't come to me with your perspective, come to me with some evidence that you see that happening. I'd like to see some indicators. Because if that's true, we should be able to document, be able to demonstrate that. That's what I want to see. Yes, Lisa.
The study you want to have done, is that not a duplication of effort? We had 6 studies done 18 months ago. We had the National Golf guys do it out of Florida. We had 2 groups at the University of Utah, 2 groups at Westminster College. We just had tons of studies done. We spent money on it. I don't know how you're funding this one, but is this a duplication of effort? Or is that such old news that it doesn't matter, that we need newer data?
Well, from my perspective, there's some crossover because we're looking at the same market, we're looking at the same products, but we're looking at it from a different perspective. With all due respect, we are in a business environment where we do have competition. Maybe unfortunately, we're a city government and we own those assets, but we have to respect the fact that we have to compete for the revenue that we generate. And so this study is going to give us a very clear picture of where we are today and where we are in the future in terms of both the potential, the trade market, how golf has changed, as well as how to benchmark ourselves against our peers and against our competition so that we know better how to improve our operations.
The
Also,
difference,
you know-
the difference between us and a business model, entirely business model, is that we have the luxury of saying we are not a business model. And so if that is the only factor, competition, then I think it's appropriate as a response to our taxpayer public to say it's not worth spending your tax dollars on a model that has competition at this level in the private sector or other municipality sector. So I don't say it's the only decision. It's not the only factor, but it certainly plays a different role than if we were operating 6 for-profit golf
Yeah, understood.
courses.
Allison, so you're so familiar with our golf library, you put it together. Do you feel like we have the data he's talking about and what we have?
You know, from what Dan just mentioned, it sounds like we do have some of that information from previous studies. The particular element of whether golf playing is rising or falling among the general public in Salt Lake City, I'm not sure we have an exact, we have some things that approximate that, including usage at county courses, for example, usage of area courses that was done by Salt Lake County. So we do have some information that approximates that. We don't have a direct study of market demand, but I think some of the other elements Dan mentioned, we do have some of that.
And I think that actually is really valuable information to
Right,
obtain.
I think it's worth getting. I just want to make sure we're not duplicating what we already have, so we're using our resources well to get the important information we need.
Aaron.
I just want to say, when that study comes along, if it is contrary to the national study that told us golf is on decline and hadn't bottomed out and was going to continue to decline, I would need to see an accounting for the discrepancies in those reports in order to have faith in the local report.
And Dan, I think something else that would be really helpful for me is one of the things we've historically asked for are just some models of success, and we really haven't seen any good models of success. It's hard for me to imagine that we're the only entity dealing with this. Somebody's at least tried something that is giving some improved results, and so any opportunity you can use with your consultants, or if you have the opportunity with your staff to give us some models of things that are working in other similar municipalities, that would be really helpful.
Okay.
Anything else, council members? Dan, welcome to golf. And we will get this as on our schedule as quickly as possible. I'm thinking the 1st of March. And so if there's any additional information that you think of that you might want to need, please connect that to Allison and Dan for that discussion. I think there's some response we need around some of the projections where you are with your consultant. What's your timeline with that?
It should be around that same time. They began first week in January, and they estimated 10 to 12 weeks. So we should be around that.
So let's
time
stay in
frame.
touch, because if there's some value in having that completed into you, at least even in a draft format, that would be probably helpful as well. So let's stay in touch about the timing on that. We do have a gap in March, so I don't want to get too late in the month because we don't meet the second week of March. So we'll be aware of that timing.
We can try to push their time frame up.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. We're going to take just about a 15-minute break. We're a little bit ahead of schedule. We'll be back. I don't want to wait till 6:30. If we can be back by 4:30. If we can be back by 4:20, and then we'll move on to a report from Aaron on our next agenda item.
watching Capital City News, your connection to Salt Lake City government. I'm your host, Poonam Kumar. For this week's episode of Capital City News, we'll be talking to Sophia Nicholas with the city's Department of Sustainability about ways we can help clear the air. And our History Minute is about Utah's 15th governor, Olene Walker. Let's start off with our legislative update and look back. Board members of the Redevelopment Agency of Salt Lake City have chosen Derek Kitchen as the vice chair for 2017. This is Kitchen's second consecutive year as vice chair. He serves in leadership with Lisa Adams, whose 2-year term as chair finishes at the end of this year. The board is made up of members of the City Council. Throughout the month of January, the city welcomed public input on building design, safety and security issues, and more on 4 new homeless resource centers at a series of workshops, community council, and city council meetings. To share your input, visit Open City Hall at peakdemocracy.com/4278. The next public opportunity to provide comments will be held on Tuesday, February 7th at 7 p.m. at the next City Council formal meeting. On the opening day of the Utah legislative session, over 6,000 people filled the Utah State Capitol Rotunda, following the National Women's March to call out attention to local women's rights issues, discrimination, sexual assault prevention, and more. The event was one of the largest Capitol demonstrations in Salt Lake City. Longtime business leader and philanthropist Tom Guinea was presented with a key to the city from Mayor Jackie Biskupski for his 36 years of building community, historic preservation work, and ongoing leadership in the Salt Lake City restaurant industry. During the winter months, Salt Lake City experiences red alert days, better known as inversion. And oftentimes this can lead to major air pollution and health effects. Sophia Nicholas, communications manager for the City Sustainability Department, is here to share with us how we can help clear the air.
The city has really taken air quality seriously. Every time we have an inversion, our air pollution doubles in the valley. And so we need to do everything we can internally and externally to encourage folks to reduce their contribution to the air. So for the city, that means reducing the amount of driving, reducing the emissions from our fleet vehicles, improving our energy efficiency, and promoting renewables. Individuals really can make a difference to our air quality. Sometimes it's really frustrating to look out into the muck and not see the mountains and just feel like you really can't help us, but our air pollution really is comprised of many different sources. And so the biggest things that you can do as an individual are to avoid driving alone in your car, and there are a lot of ways you can do that, to reduce the emissions coming from your home, whether that's through not burning wood or making sure your furnace is tuned up and running well. The one thing that people don't necessarily realize is that the products that they use in their home, whether they're personal care products or cleaning supplies or other type of home repair products, actually put out volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, and those add up to some of the particulate pollution that we see in our inversions in the winter. And so as much as you can, avoid using aerosols for your hairspray or your room freshener or carpet cleaner and whatnot. And if you have any questions about the products that you want to use that are lower emission, you can go to the EPA's website. I think it's Safer Choice Products, and those will provide some low emissions options, including low VOC paints. If you want to learn more and find out how you can make a difference, go to slcgreen.com. We have an air quality menu that talks more about what you can do, and then if you'd like to remind yourself about what we're doing, you can click on that there. The other great resource is UCAIR, and that's ucair.org, and they have just done a fantastic job really breaking it down for people and how they can make a difference.
Next up is our History Minute.
Olene Walker, the first female governor of the state of Utah, was born Olene Smith in 1930. She received a bachelor's degree at Brigham Young University, her master's at Stanford, and completed her doctorate at the University of Utah, making her the only Utah governor to hold a PhD. Before she took her post as governor, she served in the state legislature for 8 years before deciding to run for Congress. It was in the midst of her burgeoning campaign that Mike Leavitt asked her to run as his lieutenant governor in the 1992 election. She decided she'd be able to do more good for the cause of education as lieutenant governor and accepted that post, abandoning her congressional run. For 10 years, she served as lieutenant governor fighting for education causes. When Governor Leavitt left office, she filled his vacancy. serving as the first female governor until 2005. During her time, she focused on bettering education, helping defeat school voucher legislation, and created early reading initiatives that had her at odds with the legislature. After she left office, she created the Olene S. Walker School of Politics and Public Service at Weber State University, and the state honored her by naming the Olene Walker Housing Loan Fund to help low-income Utahns find affordable housing. She passed away at the age of 85 in 2015.
That's it for another episode of Capital City News. Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to learn more about how you can help reduce the air pollution, visit slcgreen.com. For SLC TV, I'm Poonam Kumar. Happy New Year and welcome to another edition of Capital City News, your connection to Salt Lake City government. I'm your host, Poonam Kumar, and I'm at the Utah State Capitol, which will become a very active place during the legislative session beginning on January 23rd. For this week's episode, we'll be talking to Salt Lake City Police Chief Mike Brown about something very near and dear to his heart. And our History Minute is about a famous silent actor named Max Swain. But first, let's start with our legislative update and look back. The City Council has been working hard on its priorities for the 2017 state legislative session. Some priorities include funding for homeless facilities and services, affordable housing, watershed protection, internet sales tax, and more. Eve Winterfest returned to downtown Salt Lake City to ring in the new year with a 20-foot wide mirror ball drop. The multi-day celebration of art and culture featured events and activities for the entire family, ranging from bounce houses to live entertainment, laser shows, and more. Where Children Sleep is a new exhibit at the Leonardo, which reveals a series of photographs of children and their bedrooms from many different countries and circumstances. Mayor Biskupski attended the opening press event where she spoke about the importance of partnerships in addressing housing needs in the city. Salt Lake City and the Economic Development Corporation of Utah announced national outdoor products company Big Agnes, who produces award-winning sleeping bags and tents, will be expanding its operation along the Wasatch Front. The company's new domestic distribution center will be located at 1810 South, 4370 West in Salt Lake City. Making sure Salt Lake City is a welcoming city is a top priority here. Salt Lake City Police Chief Mike Brown talks to us about his department's commitment to ensuring safety for all residents.
Immigration is a hot topic right now, not only nationally, but locally here in Salt Lake City. And I have to say, following the election, we had some of our communities, some of our immigrant communities, very fearful and scared. And wondering what was going to happen with the immigration policies nationally as well as locally here in Salt Lake City. And so one thing that we've done very strong and very open and transparent is that we will not change our immigration policy. We will not go out and do federal immigration enforcement. And I think that's important to tell those people who are actually keeping their kids home from school, that are afraid to really ask these important questions. And so I think as far as a police department and a city, we need to get out in front of this and let them know that, number one, we won't enforce it, and number two, we shouldn't enforce it. I mean, when you really think about it, immigration enforcement is a civil issue. It's a civil matter. Can you imagine your police department going out and enforcing tax laws? Well, it's almost the same. Why would we go out and enforce immigration? So, with that being said, we have worked so hard to develop trust and confidence within the communities, all communities here in Salt Lake City, and especially the immigrant communities. So if we were to go out and even hint that we were going to enforce immigration, that would destroy that trust and that confidence that we have worked so hard to build. If anybody has questions, if anybody is living in fear, if anybody needs to be reassured, I want them to know they can call me personally. They can call Chief Mike Brown. I will take their call. I will meet with them. We can have meetings. We can meet with our communities. We can set up meetings wherever you want to sit down and talk about this very important issue. I just want people to know that their chief and their police department stands behind them, and we're here to protect and serve all communities within Salt Lake City.
And now it's time for a History Minute.
Born in Salt Lake City in 1876, Moroni Mac Swain took an early interest in the theatrical arts. At the age of 6, he created his own show called Mac Swain's Mammoth Minstrels. At 8, he stole all of the linens in the house to create his own circus tent. By 15, he ran away from home to join a traveling minstrel show. His mother caught up
you do have a presentation.
I'd like an apology for the late time of starting here, though. 4:20.
He paid for you to
I'm
go on the
kidding.
trip. You shut up and just present.
Is this the kind of abuse I'm gonna get?
Oh wait,
'Cause I might go sit back in my
wait,
desk.
This is getting off on the wrong foot. Welcome back to our council meeting this
We're
afternoon.
actually talking about abuse. So
We
it's
are
okay.
honored at this point in our agenda to hear from fellow council member Erin Mendenhall, who's going to be talking to us about a conference she attended actually last fall, wasn't it?
It was November.
Yes. All right. So you clearly have something to share with us, so I'm going to just let you go. Thanks, Erin.
I tend to just go anyway. So to have 20 minutes is such a luxury. And I hope that I'll actually leave time for us to talk a little bit at the end. But I want to start by saying I am a rookie in the realm of sex trafficking. And I learned that by talking to experts around Salt Lake City. But then I got to go to the JUST conference, which is an acronym for Juvenile Sex Trafficking, which is put on by Shared Hope International. And it's a nonprofit out of Washington State. And it's much more than juveniles. And they include law enforcement, service providers, therapists, caseworkers, government policy makers, and church groups. Everyone in between actually has something to contribute to this conversation. So it was a fantastic conference. And the overall sense that I had at this was that we are on the cusp of an issue and have the opportunity to have a dialogue here, much as this council was on the cusp of the Code R kit testing issue. That this is, sex trafficking is happening in Salt Lake City as the crossroads of the West, more than in other cities in the region. That it is happening all over the country, in every major city. And that as we are facing homeless services in our city and affordable housing, that we have an opportunity that is, it's a perfect time for us to start talking about this. So thank you for giving me a minute, and I hope you learn a little bit from this presentation. Trafficking is a definition that I think in and of itself is uncomfortable for us to talk about, and the definition is quite broad and actually has been federally broadened in the last couple of years, and we'll get into that in a second. But men and women are both trafficked. Children are definitely trafficked. And they come from different countries and from the United States itself. But there's really significant vulnerability factors across the board. And some of those are listed here. We see those in, particularly in the youth that are homeless, LGBTQ, either or both, or one or the other, that are in foster care situations. These are the kind of factors that may make one more vulnerable, and yet we can't exactly pin down the vulnerability because it is so broad. Trafficking is a definition about coercing one for another's gain, and the use of fraud, force, or coercion would by one onto another would make a trafficking case. A commercial sex act is the giving and receiving of anything in exchange for a sex act, not just money. And then people talk about, well, what about girls who choose this? And I say girls because 18 and younger. And in a moment, you'll see a slide that talks about when law enforcement and caseworkers interview young women who are trafficking victims and ask if they feel threatened or they feel vulnerable, they almost never say yes. They say, no, I'm fine, and they express self-empowerment, and they become miscategorized. But it does not matter what she or he says. If they are being trafficked, if there is any force, fraud, or coercion happening, any at all, they are a trafficking victim. And this opens up their opportunity for access to services that is then beyond my pay grade. Here's an infographic, I think, that helps us realize how broad this issue is. And in particular, LGBTQ youth, more so than heterosexual youth, have identified that 76% or so of LGBTQ youth says that they feel more comfortable being honest about themselves on social media than they do in real life, as older people like me would call it. And therefore, that vulnerability that they are willing to express online is often taken advantage of, and that is the number one place of exploitation, or at least for that initial hook to happen with exploiters.
So, Aaron,
You want me to go back?
Yeah, I'm curious about, is that the point of entry? So people who are exploiting are doing that through potentially some social media disclosure. Is that what I'm hearing? Is that accurate? That is where a lot of this sort of maybe initial contact or the hook happens?
Yes,
Okay.
and that's from my understanding. And also that the connections with Johns happens then subsequently through the same social media means. But the victimization component is often initiated there. And I think that's different, though, for homeless youth, where the vulnerability of being alone on the streets is what I'm hearing is the primary route to exploitation.
So when you're talking about social network in this graphic here, you're talking about a combination.
Social media.
Social media. I see social network up there. Are you talking about social media network, social network, or combination?
Thanks for pulling that out. This is a slide about men, women, children, all categories, and when I was talking about social network with LGBTQ youth, I really meant social media. But you're right, they're separate in this.
Okay.
Families, and it's typically someone that they know for all. Actually, it's not on this slide, but we're going to get there in just a second. It's really supply and demand. And we hear a lot about victims, and we hear about, sometimes we hear about the exploiters, the pimps, but we really don't talk about the Johns. And without the Johns, there would be no industry. There's another slide in here that says this is the second most profitable industry after drug sales, illegal industry. It's a $150 billion industry, and it is thriving in the United States. New Orleans is the #1 site.
How
and
accurate is
Atlanta's
that
second.
number?
That's a great question. I mean, I'm giving you what I learned at the JUST conference, and it would be great to have some vetting on this, but this is just what I've learned at the conference, so I'm sorry I don't have
No, that's okay. I'm just wondering like how you actually
quantify it.
quantify that, yeah.
That's a great question. I hope we have lots of questions, because that's how we're going to have a better discussion than me presenting to you. So Johns. I want to say one more thing about that, because when I've talked with our Vice Squad here in Salt Lake and asked who are the Johns and could they break it out by whether or not they're Salt Lake City residents or not, they said that more than half of the Johns that they pick up in Salt Lake City are not from Salt Lake City, which isn't surprising to any of us. But we hear about, and I think it would be fascinating to have Vice come and talk to us about the options that we might have as a city, legislative-wise, to take a harder look at prosecuting Johns, because we have in the past. But you hear about how you can't assume who is and isn't a John, that a lot of them have car seats in the back and they're going home to their families. And we have a society where it is okay. It seems to be okay for men to pay for sex, to exploit women, mostly. 99% of the buyers are male. And this is definitely a bigger societal issue, but I'd like us to take a look at it from a local and maybe a legislative perspective. So this conference also talks about the way that victims are further victimized by some probably well-intentioned state laws, but that end up criminalizing them and not recognizing them as victims. So they actually give a report card every year and to every single state. And this is just the top header, and I've given you all, there's a one-pager that is the rest of the report card for Utah. And it's a lot of state legislation, but not entirely. And you can see here that we do pretty well on prosecuting and I'm sorry I didn't break out what all of the symbols mean, but if you go to sharedhope.org, you can pull up the report cards and it tells you what all of these are. So the place that we do the least well is in prosecution of Johns, and that's why we're getting a B instead of an A. They go on to, that didn't format very well, but they're under the link to the report card is a legislative opportunities link, basically, where it's 66 pages where they've gone through our state constitution and identified opportunities. And again, not all of them are necessarily would have to be done by the state. So this is an opportunity for us from a legislative perspective. I'm sorry that didn't format. I think I gave you the first page of that one also. One of the presentations that I most enjoyed was from this Deborah's Gate in Vancouver. They are at an undisclosed location in Vancouver. It's a facility run by the Salvation Army of Canada, who was really disturbed by the number of women going missing and murdered without explanation. And so they conducted a needs assessment, and they found this need in Canada, in the Vancouver area, for a high security facility with wraparound services. And they formed a committee, and they looked at best practices, and they opened as a 30 to 60 day shelter. And they found out really quickly 30 to 60 days was not nearly enough time. So they scaled back the amount of beds that they offer, and they only offered 10 beds at a time. But this is with no end slated for anyone. People can stay there for years, and some women have. It's not only women who can be there. So this is a really unique facility that has everything from Aboriginal mentorship in Canada. That is a little bit more in high demand. To belly dancing is like a means of reclaiming connection with the body. There's all of these different and sort of some seeming off-the-wall techniques, but this is developed through a survivor-focused service model. They even will remove branding and tattoos at this facility, because a lot of times women who've been trafficked, kids who are trafficked, are branded with their pimp's identification. Another thing that they found that I thought was really fascinating as we're looking at our women's facility for homeless services is about 24-hour care, access to services. And they found that that women who've been homeless or women who have been trafficked have different sleep schedules than we do as 9-to-5 workers. And some of their most successful treatment times are between midnight and 4 a.m. That's when they're awake. That's when they feel like working on stuff. And so they've adapted to be able to accommodate that. And I thought that was really fascinating, as we hear that women experiencing homelessness are often awake through the night so they can sleep during the day in a more safe environment. And I think about that in terms of our resource center that we're looking to. So there were lots of survivor-focused service models at this conference, and there were breakout sessions for law enforcement, specifically for service providers, for policymakers. But this general theme of education was the most beneficial part for me as a rookie. 80% of survivors were sexually exploited youth or children, and that is a low number based on what I have heard from our local service providers for women who are currently trafficking victims, that they are by and large victims from their very young childhoods, and that they become victims the rest of their lives and sometimes pass that on. This, I wanted to bring that up also, that when PD is talking to victims, these women and young men don't really see themselves as victims, especially at that point, and that sometimes our approach in categorizing people and making services available is flawed, even from the language that's used. So that is a training opportunity, I think, for our local law enforcement to make sure that the way that they are communicating with victims is a welcoming dialogue.
Can you elaborate on that at all? I mean, I can speculate about what I think might be going on for 14 to 16-year-olds who are in this situation, and it sort of feels like it triggers a lot of survival and tough guy kind of mentality. Is that what really is going on? It's like I can do it on my own, kind of. I don't need your help.
I think so, and that it's law enforcement's objective to get a sense of their own sense of vulnerability, what their threats are, get a measure of the threats as that person sees them at the time. And if someone is saying, this isn't my pimp, this is my boyfriend, and no, I don't, we live together, I want to live with him. You know, how do you begin to establish a case of victimization when the victim doesn't identify as a victim at all and is, acting in a threatened type way by the questioning even?
Well, and it seems like, how do you develop an intervention when in our way of thinking, we're looking at people who want to be assisted because they're victims, but that's not the reality they're living in. They're in survival mode, and that can be a very independent mode in that moment.
So there's an organization that I'll put a slide up next. I think it's next. Not quite. Journey of Hope. It's a local nonprofit organization, and they often meet with youth in the JRS system. So they've been booked, or they're in jail, or they're in some kind of placement, and they bring in Journey of Hope, for example, to talk about the way she tells it. Shannon Cox is the director, and she talks about telling a story about the way that boys who are exposed to violence or scary things in the home, drugs, who are maybe raped at home, sexually abused, the way they act out as they grow up. And then when she talks to girls, she tells them both the same story. The way girls do that is different. We don't act out like this. We act out by looking for relationships that make us feel good, and by cutting and unhealthy eating habits, and she tells this story about the way that turns into unhealthy relationships and unhealthy body, and that they self-identify through this process of hearing, that's what happened to me, and this and this and this is the way it was. Instead of someone saying, telling them what's wrong with you, we start to ask, what happened to you? And it's a change of the conversation that this trauma-informed care is really trained to do, and I am not trained to do that. But
Erin,
I'm learning about the benefit.
Can I ask you a question about your second bullet point? Pimps are looking and listening better than service providers. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that this equation of, maybe I didn't put it in here, the vulnerability, the equation for victimization talks about the feelings of vulnerability, needs not being met, and then promises for those needs to be met and for companionship. And that this is the path towards exploitation, abuse, and so on. And that I heard time and again from survivors at this conference that no one ever asked me. I was running away, I was skipping school, I was getting picked up and going to juvenile detention, I was drinking, I was smoking pot, and I got placed in foster care. And time and again, until they're maybe in their 20s or 30s, no one ever asked, what's going on? They'll say, what's wrong with you? You shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be doing this. But getting to the root of what are you experiencing and where's the trauma? For example, one example I heard again and again is that at the elementary school level, that there is a quick diagnosis at this time in the world of ADHD, and that oftentimes there's actually trauma happening at home, and it's not necessarily that quick diagnosis, but to ask those questions. What happened? That's the way that this trust begins to be built between the victims and the pimps. And they are asking those questions, and that's where that this isn't my pimp, this is my boyfriend comes in. That there is a fulfillment in that relationship that's happening. Does that make sense, Lisa? I am really a rookie at this, so. But that it really is the responsibility of these service providers, not just the service providers, that's like such a term farther down the list, but school counselors and police, therapists, to identify this. The onus shouldn't be on the victims themselves.
So do you think it's training for those folks to know the right questions to ask?
That's what I was told. That's what I've been told. I'd love to hear Andrew's thoughts on.
Because when I used to do foster care reviews, we would see the foster parents, the mom or dad, the actual birth mom or dad, and sometimes both, and the child. And as a board, that's pretty scary if you're a 10-year-old and you're in front of these 8 adults. But we had some training to help us to know how to ask them. Tell us about your experience and what's something fun you've done, to kind of help them warm up. And I was grateful to have that kind of training, and it was minimal. I mean, that's the best training I had was being a mom. But I don't know, Andrew. I'm interested to know what if you think that's
what you said,
training.
the best training is being a mom is true on many levels because you've had to develop certain skills in dealing with children. That makes sense, but trauma-informed care, as Ruth is saying, I assume that everybody I'm coming in contact with has experienced some trauma. That's my assumption up front. And then you talk about skills, about what does that mean for their behaviors? What does the behavior mean? Where are they coming from and understanding that behavior? And if you're a mother, maybe the skill you learned was listening or trying to figure out the behavior I'm seeing is not the problem. There's something underneath the behavior they're trying to communicate. With this concept also, it's about, well, the behavior is not the problem, it's a communication issue. They're communicating something about their experience to us. We just don't know how to understand it. I don't have the skills yet. But that's where it really comes from. And all the specifics about how do you build a building that is trauma-informed or have a program that's trauma-informed or what are the skills of how do I interview, those kind of things. But really what you're looking for is trying to figure out, do you come from a place of just in being inquisitive and wanting to know more about them? On their level, and then they'll teach you the language, like the terms and the nuances and what they mean when it's my boyfriend versus my pimp versus my father or whoever else, right? But that inquisitiveness, asking questions, trying to understand first, is really what we're talking about, I think.
Yeah, the idea of asking where are you coming from, not why are you going to this, why are you doing this? It's where did you come from that's led you to this point? Tell me your story. So our opportunity, as I see it, I talked about the homeless services conversation and the affordable housing conversation, but our partnerships that we already have in this city are an incredible jumping off point if we wanted to expand this conversation. Journey of Hope is one of those entities. The Asian Association does a drop-in center just on Major Street once a week for just a few hours that is specifically for women on the street. And that is largely the only services that women who are on State Street and experiencing trafficking, who are truly victims of trafficking, that is the services that they are receiving, is drop-in where they can get a cup of coffee and pick up some condoms and maybe have a granola bar and be able to talk to other women who know what's happening to them. That's a shocking void in access for me. It's disturbing, and it gives me hope that there's entities out there like Journey of Hope that works with the LDS Church, Utah Department of Corrections, where they get mentors through the church. It's usually elder missionary couples who act as long-term mentors for women coming out of incarceration. Their ideal point is that they meet the women about 4 months before they're released and start that mentorship, trust building, start to look at their legal background and what kind of legal assistance they might need, whether or not they have kids, do they have access to those kids when they get out, what housing do they have planned, do they need rehabilitative services when they get out, and their recidivism in the time that they've been operational is astounding. 14 out of 169 have returned to prison. And they've served hundreds of individual walk-ins in the past year. And they're located in the Central 9th neighborhood. Oh, that's the end of my slideshow. It's obvious that we have other partnership opportunities around here. And I wish that I had an easy ask of you guys, because I think it's a big deal that we are building a women's only homeless resource center, but that's not going to cut it for this population. And what we could set our sights on is a long-term wraparound services, trauma-informed, gender-focused, which doesn't mean necessarily one gender, but care that is gender-focused. That is something that's going to be a harder lift. But I think that we have a lot of potential to do that kind of a thing here in Salt Lake City. And the JUST conference this year will be held in New Orleans, which is the sex trafficking capital of the United States. And the benefit for policymakers is clear, and for law enforcement. So I've forwarded the invitation that has come through Shared Hope recently to our law enforcement. And I think that if we are interested in starting this conversation, it would be worthwhile to look at more of us going with partners in October.
Thanks, Erin. This was really helpful. Question for you personally. This is an important issue, but where did the interest begin with you? Was there a personal story? Did you meet somebody? How did this show up on your radar as an important issue? Because it's flying under the radar for most people.
It is. It's an uncomfortable issue, and it's uncomfortable for me even, because as a mother, as a woman, you don't want to think about the reality of this happening in your city, in your schools. But that's what we take up when we become policymakers. And so when I took office and I saw that crime around the State Street area had been increasing, and we had a couple of drive-bys in the area, and I looked at the redevelopment potential and the displacement likelihood of women who are sex workers on State Street. I didn't want to accept the status quo around State Street anymore. And to really affect the issues that are happening there, it is so much more than a redevelopment area and more than cops increased in the area. It's more than community involvement even. Because if we don't focus on this most vulnerable population and the real needs that they have that we are not meeting, that no one in this community is really meeting, then we push it off to another part of the city or to another city. And we have the potential in our short time in office here to do big things. So, am I going to be successful at turning State Street around while I get to serve in office? That's a big lift, and I'm not sure that success by anyone's definition is achievable in a year or 5 years. But my gosh, I'm going to try. So this approach is getting at the root of an issue that is in every city, every big city in the whole world. Prostitution's, what do they say, the second oldest profession in the world. But that doesn't mean that we can't do anything about it. So when I started to try to learn more about the people who are living on State Street, which is more than prostitutes, but that's, I think, one of the hardest populations that people want to look at and deal with. My heart went out to the real victimization that many and most of their lives have been. And then on top of it, I learned from 4th Street Outreach of the dozen babies that were born in and around the motels on State Street the year before. And so we're not just talking about these victims themselves. And I know I'm bouncing between trafficking victims from other countries to sex workers on State Street, but this is the umbrella of trafficking, and that's the reality of it. That it's not just those people, it's the children of those people and the tax dollars that we are spending right now on getting those kids through the NICU, off of heroin, into foster homes, on drugs to help them develop normally. And I want us to look at this.
Did this conference talk about the intersection of sex workers and like heroin use, for instance, and how to treat two very separate but like oftentimes linked issues, and how do you get, so for instance, I went out with the 4th Street Clinic and I met 2 sex workers. One of them had just given birth about 3 weeks beforehand, and she was selling her body, and I think that that's the only way she knew how to pay for the $55 a night motel and get her dose of heroin. And so I'm just wondering if there's strategies or techniques that you picked up that we could incorporate into our policing or into the way we discuss these resource centers. And can you expand on that a bit?
I wish that I could do any bit of justice to that big conversation, and I'm really not going to try, except to say that the service providers that are local, who I just met with again today, are looking at things like the detox center for women and women with children that is part of the county's approach here as a much needed entity, but the importance also of making it work for women who have been selling their bodies, as you put it, in having it not be in the same building with the men's facility, and probably not even on the same campus as the men's facility, that there need to be really real safeguards around that. And obviously that's a county conversation that we could have, that we won't make the decisions about, but there's very real concerns. Another theme throughout this is bringing in survivors to inform the processes we build for victims. And I know that even locally there are laws, state laws, that prevent people who have criminal histories involving sex exploitation from serving on boards and commissions and from working in certain facilities with certain demographics. So there are a lot of obstacles.
Aaron, and as have you been meeting with people, have the state attorney general has some priority for sex trafficking? The county in the past has had some programming through the health department, I believe, for sex workers who are coming out of the system and back onto the street, but I can't verify that they still have that. Are you familiar with maybe some of the other partners that are doing some work that would make sense to explore or to partner up with or to move forward with?
I am not at all aware and haven't had a conversation with the Attorney General, and that would be a really wonderful place for us to initiate a dialogue as a body. But I will tell you that I've met with Sim Gill, and it's been I think a year now, and we tried to get him on the agenda back last fall, but it didn't get to happen, to talk about the POP and John's program, the prostitution outreach program that the city once had with Judge Baxter, and the John's program, which they were 6-week programs, I believe, something like that.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the plea and abeyance program that was a diversion program that actually our agency modeled some work after that they were doing. That was 6 or 8 weeks.
Yep.
That was actually showing some pretty good results.
It was, and it was a budget cut that cut it. Yeah. And I've also spoke with Judge Baxter briefly about those programs, and Sim. They are open to having conversations with us about bringing those back and talking about maybe lessons learned from a decade ago and how they might be implemented in this sort of new context.
Okay. Yeah, Andrew. Yeah, at least what? No, go ahead.
Chair.
Go ahead.
Derek asked a question about about trauma and addiction work, and there are models out there that do that. And what you're talking about is a stabilization place where, if the substance use is a coping mechanism from the underlying experiences, the trauma, the awful things, you stabilize and then you work on that as you go forward over a long period of time. This is it's not an acute hospital model. You don't go in for a month and you get fixed. You stabilize and give yourself a chance to get some new coping skills over a long period of time, but you're talking about exactly right that it takes a long time, and we need a lot of support ongoing, not just in small episodes. One of the things that's intriguing to me as a city is, can we take the idea that Aaron's talked about with trauma and say, can we have a position as a city that we're going to be trauma informed? because this isn't just about these small sort of or smaller groups of people that we identify as being traumatized. For a lot of people who come in contact with city or bureaucracies, it becomes traumatizing. You get fearful, you get nervous. When you walk in the building, you get tight and anxious. That's a sort of little t trauma. And if we took an idea and said, maybe we have a stance as a city or as departments or as a community that we want to be trauma informed and assume that people have traumatic experiences, even small t ones. And how do we change the way we interact with people that way? Do we take it from a place of trying to understand where they're coming from and their frustration or their fear, or the things they bring up? It's sort of an ideology in some ways, more than a specific policy, but it's a way to inform some of our specific policies within departments or across our city, and maybe bring in specific trainings. It's a lot of just human interaction skills that maybe we assume that are common, but they're not. And once you put it into a form and say, here's a training, it may feel like it's something I should know, duh. But it could help us in a lot of different ways in just dealing with the public in general, and having interactions that are sort of healthy both ways.
That's a really cool idea. I'm thinking about the opportunity of Youth City too, and our Youth City operations engage with a lot of kids in our city, and I wonder about whether or not those staff are trauma informed. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities, and obviously I know very little about these professional subjects, but there's people who know a lot more than me.
So any other questions or comments? Aaron, are you considering attending again this year?
I am very interested in attending, but I wanted to get a sense from my peers if this is something that we're interested in learning more about, and maybe finding out about legislative options, about budget options, to become more trauma informed as a city and looking at our resource centers in this way, but looking farther to a facility we haven't even dreamed of yet. And if there's interest in that, then I would love to attend again, but I would really like to not go alone. And even if that means that someone from the county or from some nonprofits come with us, I think a team approach will be beneficial. But
Appreciate that. Yeah, and I'm intrigued with the idea of a law enforcement connection too, because I think that could be valuable depending on where we form that connection to the conference, because that sounds like a lot of opportunity for education and modification of some of our models. It feels like a good starting point for rethinking how we're doing this now.
And maybe more broadly, that I think it would be really informative to do a needs assessment. And perhaps that's something we could speak with the mayor about doing jointly. I met with the FBI, Vice, and local service providers 2 years ago now to ask about what are the needs for this population that aren't being met. And they're as simple as you take a victim out of a trafficking situation at a massage parlor on Major or Main Street, and where do you hold them until they get to go to trial and give testimony against their exploiters? In a motel? That doesn't really work. Where is a safe place for these victims? And they had a lot of concerns. So the needs, I think, would come out of the woodwork. But until we really ask those questions, maybe take a trauma-informed approach at a needs assessment, we don't really know what the need is. So I think I like the idea of us looking at the immediate options, but I would love for us to get really inquisitive about what are the needs in this city as the crossroads of the West.
Well, I think you've identified some good next steps. I think talking with the county, talking with the jail perhaps, or the health department, or there's a couple good steps there. The Attorney General, see what they're doing and what opportunities they might have.
Thanks for your time.
Could you get the staff the information about the next conference so we at least have it in our calendar? This is one that we approved because it's not in the normal sort of realm of things, but certainly it sounds like it was of significant value. So
yes,
thanks for sharing.
Thanks.
Looking at our agenda, actually, our next item is a board appointment for the Sugar House Park Authority, and Taylor has been waiting patiently. Thank you, Taylor. So let's talk to Taylor. She's being proposed as an appointment to the Sugar House Park Authority Board, which, as a reminder, is a board consisted of county and city representatives, and it's jointly managed by both the county and the city. Welcome.
Thank you.
If you could take a minute and tell us a little bit about yourself and also your interest in this particular board, that would be really helpful.
Yeah. So I've lived in the Sugar House area for 4.5 years. I'm a transplant from Chicago, so made my way out west.
So you're going to convert it into Millennial Park? Is that what you're going to
Yes,
suggest?
definitely.
All
We
right.
need a
I'm on board there for that. So
I think the park should say exactly how it is, and that's one of the reasons I'm interested in being on the board. As a member of the community, I work at Westminster College as a cross-country and track coach. I'm also a sales rep for Adidas representing our running products. So I'm deeply ingrained in our running community and use the park both personally and professionally. With the cross-country team, we use it as a big recruiting tool. Take a lot of our high schoolers over there to try to sway them to come to Westminster and run for us. And then professionally, with Adidas, working with a lot of the local running clubs like the Salt Lake Track Club, Salt Lake Running Company. We do group runs, utilize the park for events. So really my interest in being on the board stems from the skill set that I could bring to it. So there's a diverse group of people on the board, a lot of different skills, and the individual who was leaving the board had a lot of experience in event management. And I thought, well, that's something I could bring to it, is just the knowledge of the running community, being able to help approve a lot of the 5Ks and charity races that occur there.
thanks. Any questions or comments?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I am thrilled that you want to serve on this board. As you know, I represent District 7, and I think that Sugar House Park is kind of the fabulous center of District 7, and I've been impressed with the work that the board does. I attend probably a couple times a year the meetings, and it's generally, if you've been there very much, it's generally a lot about approving events to be held there. So, I think they're doing a good job. So thank you for your willingness to do that, and we're happy
Absolutely.
you're in our community.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comment? So I do have one thought I'll just share with you. That we've had discussions over the years with the Sugar House Park Authority about looking at opportunities to be a little more flexible about how they do sponsorships and how things might happen there that could generate some revenue at the park or provide some partnership. And there's been a little resistance. I'm not suggesting we rename it Sugar House Park, brought to you by Adidas, but at least opening the door and looking at, are there some opportunities there? Because as many of our facilities, we run into challenges with capital improvements and investments. So I would encourage you to just maybe try to explore those a little bit. I want to thank you for your willingness to serve on one of our commissions. We think very highly of the people who provide us that volunteer service. Your name is on our consent agenda for this evening. You are more than welcome to stay and attend our riveting formal session, but your attendance is also not required. So thank you very much for your willingness to serve on one of our commissions.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
For having me.
Yes.
And thank you on behalf of District 5. I think you live in District 5. And I thank you for serving. Keep in touch. And it's exciting that we have some money set aside for a downtown park that has yet to be discovered. It's just hiding there somewhere. We're going to find it.
And Adidas will sponsor it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Public-private
Thanks for your time.
partnerships.
Our next agenda item, I'm going to change agenda a little bit. We do have a closed session this evening, but I've noticed that Len is here, so I'm going to bump up item number 9, which is our national legislative briefing. We'll invite Len to come up front here. And are you on your own, Len, or do you have other? Is it you? You are entirely capable of handling this, so. And as absolutely intrigued as I am to hear about your perspective at the national level, I have a commitment I have to excuse myself before, so as no reflection on my interest, and I might just have to give you a call, because you may not be able to share what you actually think in a public meeting. I'm not suggesting that's true.
But I think you should.
I'm speculating. I think you should. It's a safe place. For those, you've not met everyone here, have you, or have you?
Yes.
Yeah, last year. You would have last year.
Last February.
Great. This is our annual opportunity to talk with Len Simon, who is our representative in Washington, and hear his perspective on what's going on there and what the challenges are and the opportunities. And we'll let you have a few minutes to sort of set the stage for us, and then open it up for questions and comments.
Mr.
Welcome.
Chair,
Yes.
before he even does that, could I make a comment?
Sure.
to him? I just want to thank you for the excellent reports that we've been receiving out of your office from really the day after the election. Really informative, very helpful. I just can't tell you, my heart dropped when I'd read some of what was there, but I really appreciated how thorough it was and really how fair and balanced. And thank you
Sometimes
so much.
we have the same reaction when we write them.
Yeah, she said helpful, not hopeful, and that was...
And Mr. Chair, every time I get one of the emails since the election, I'm expecting you to say America is great again, and these are the reasons why.
Yeah, it's,
But really,
Brian.
thank you. Really helpful.
Okay, let me see if I
reports.
can corral this group a little bit. Len, please.
I will tell you, in one of the other places we work for around the country, I gave a presentation similar to this, although not quite as advanced because it was earlier, but it was the week before the holidays, and when I got finished, the mayor said, well, Len, and Merry Christmas to you too. So anyway, it's good to be here, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your courtesy and getting us scheduled here. I want to thank the mayor and her team, particularly David and Simone, who are my day-to-day liaisons with the mayor's office, and of course Cindy and her team for all the great work they do throughout the year. This is, as we've been bantering, certainly the most unusual time we've had in Washington in my years there. The partnership Salt Lake City has had with the federal government over the years has been important to the city's growth and prosperity and problem solving. We want to do our best to try to retain that partnership, but as I'll demonstrate to you today, it won't be easy. There will definitely be some hurdles. I met today with the mayor and staff and many of the department heads to discuss our federal projects and priorities. The mayor was in Washington about 2 weeks ago for the U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting, and we got a little bit of a sense of the direction that things are going in. I look forward to working with everyone on the council tonight and in the challenging months ahead. We're undoubtedly in uncharted territory, but we have to nonetheless move forward. To make the best use of the time you've provided me tonight, I want to talk a little bit about the uncharted territory. I want to summarize, just for the record, because we won't have the chance to do it again, why the Obama administration worked so well for local governments. I want to review for you what we know so far about the new administration, how it's organizing its personnel, policies, and plans, review the prospects for city projects as we now know them, and discuss the next steps both here in D.C. As I said, uncharted territory. We're entering into a new era. 1 month ago today, a new Congress was sworn in. 18 days ago, a new administration was sworn in. Eventually, when the administration is fully in place, that's 4,000 presidential appointees. About half of those need Senate confirmation. The other half will work for that first half. So it's a whole new crowd coming into the White House and into the cabinet agencies. As we've talked about, we're trying to chronicle this for you through our special reports and transition reports and through our regular Friday report each week. There are going to be big changes. We have single-party government there, which means that almost everything that gets proposed can be delivered in one form or another. Let me divert just for a second, talk a little bit about what I think were the 5 most important parts of the Obama administration as they relate to local government as a frame of reference. First of all, number one, the Obama administration was largely composed of local officials, whether it was the secretaries of HUD, DOT, Labor, and all throughout the government. We had people from city governments, regional governments, some folks from the states, but we had a common culture and language with them. Secondly, from the Recovery Act on in 2009, the Obama administration was characterized by big initiatives that had an enormous impact on us here at the local level. Obamacare, immigration, climate change, equality, just to name a few. Third, the Obama administration invested money in local governments in key areas, whether it was infrastructure, housing, and human resources. They put their money where their mouth was when it came to the annual budget. Fourth, problem solvers. You could always take a problem, one that incidentally might have been caused by a federal agency, but take it to the White House or to the Secretary's office in any of the cabinet departments and work to get it solved. And then fifth and final, we were always involved in the Obama administration's 8 years in the development of policies, not just there when they landed, but there at the takeoff as well. And I think that reflected the success that Salt Lake enjoyed over 8 years with that administration. So what do we know so far about the incoming administration? So far, frankly, local governments have been little involved so far in the policy, the personnel, or the structural issues that they're dealing with as they put the administration together. Through the Trump Tower meetings, there were a few mayors from around the country who met with the president-elect. Vice President-elect Pence came and talked to mayors at the Conference of Mayors meeting 2 weeks ago. It's pretty rare, though, to have one-party government in power in Washington. Over the course of the last 37 years, since the beginning of the Reagan administration, there's only about 6 full years where the White House and the House and the Senate were all controlled by one party. So that means, and again, the absence of local government involvement so far, one-party rule, and a very big agenda that this administration has, both on the domestic and foreign policy side. I should also add that so much, particularly in the second term of the Obama administration, had to be accomplished through executive orders. We're now seeing on an almost daily basis there are executive orders or presidential memoranda or executive actions, depending on what's legally required, undoing many of those Obama-era initiatives by Trump executive orders. So we're dealing with that as well. The White House in particular, we benefited from the way the Obama White House was organized, talking about local official involvement. The key office within the White House for us is the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. It gives us access to push our priorities. It helps on our problem solving. It's a two-way early warning system. They can tell us things before it happens. We can tell them things as well. The last 8 years, we had 2 people directly from local government. One, for the first 6 years, it was David Agnew, who had been chief of staff to Mayor Joe Riley in Charleston, the longest-serving mayor in the country at the time. And then for the last 2 years, Jerry Abramson, who'd been mayor of Louisville for 21 years, all sort of guiding local government policies there in the White House. There was an official appointed last week to head up the Intergovernmental Office. His name is Justin Clark. He's now the director. He's a Trump campaign person. We've reached out to them. They haven't reached back to us yet. We hope to establish a relationship with him on your behalf. He does not come from local government. He comes more from the campaign side of the world. He reports to Rick Dearborn, who's deputy chief of staff, who was the chief of staff to Jeff Sessions in the United States Senate. So we'll see what happens there. The cabinet is about half confirmed, including this morning, Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos on a 51-50 vote with the vice president voting got confirmed. We'll be working closely, as close as we can, with DOT because of all of our transportation issues, transit, highways, bridges. Elaine Chao, probably one of the most respected people in Washington that's previously served in the cabinet. She was Secretary of Labor under George Bush the son for 8 years, Deputy Secretary of Transportation under George Bush, the father, for 4 years. So I think she's got a lot of good transportation experience. We will look forward to working with her and her team. Dr. Ben Carson.
And happens to be Mitch McConnell's wife.
Yes,
So
indeed.
there goes the checks and balances for the Senate.
There you go. There you go. Oh, well. Although, and interestingly, there was one no vote against Secretary Chao, which was Chuck Schumer, the minority leader, and which I thought was interesting enough, because you would think, based on protocol, that you'd want to vote for your colleague's wife. But turns out that was the first vote ever cast against a Secretary of Transportation nomination since the department was created in 1967, which is kind of amazing. But we have so much going on that matters to this city in HUD: CDBG, homelessness, Section 8. We are looking for some indication about Secretary Carson's path. He's one of the great accomplished Americans, not in this area, but there's precedent for other people coming into cabinet departments and in areas where they had not great expertise before and doing very well. He's a brilliant man, and we look forward to working with him. I mentioned Secretary DeVos. That's going to be a real challenge, because her focus is so much on charter schools, and her experience is not in that area, not in the public school area.
She will supply guns for schools in case of grizzly bears.
That's
That could be
coming
good.
back. That's coming back. Attorney General Sessions, by the way, is not only does he have a strong record that concerns us on sanctuary cities, but he's not had a lot of favorable things to say over the years about the COPS program, Federal Resources for Community-Oriented Policing, for which Salt Lake has been a major beneficiary over the years. So I think there are going to be some challenges coming out of the Justice Department as well. We have an EPA administrator, and spent a lot of time today talking about both grants and regulations that we have in that are parked in EPA. We got a lot of concerns about that. I expect that by the end of next week, almost the whole cabinet will be in place. That's Sessions at Attorney General, Price at HHS, Mnuchin at Treasury, Perry at Energy, Zinke at Interior, and McMahon, if you haven't heard, the wife of Vince McMahon, the head of the World Wrestling Federation, is your new small business administrator once she gets confirmed. And the one that I held out for last that I'm really, really concerned about on all of our local government's behalf is the new director of the Office of Management and Budget. You don't hear a lot year in and year out about OMB, but it is the most powerful cabinet agency on the domestic side. Virtually everything that happens, whether it's HUD or DOT or HHS, flows through the Office of Management and Budget. And within OMB, we tend to almost always focus on the B, but the M is really important, because all of the regulations and all the management issues that happen in the federal government go through that agency. He has deep roots. I'm sorry, the nominee is Mick Mulvaney, congressman from South Carolina. He has the deepest possible roots into the Tea Party. He is a budget hawk like no other. And the one thing that you can say is his hawkishness on budget cuts is equal on the defense side as on the domestic side. But we expect, and I'll return to the issue of the budget in just a couple of minutes, we expect some very deep proposals in terms of budget cuts and again, one thing that I keep coming back to is, over the years, whether it's been Reagan or the first Bush or the second Bush, where there was something coming out of the White House or any of the agencies that we didn't like, you always had at least one House of Congress that you could take it to. And now that safety net of maybe Congress won't go for this proposal, whatever it is not currently there. So it's a challenge, but we've got to play with the hand that's been dealt with us. If you look at where the campaign was prior to the January 20th inauguration, what we expected was a big tax reform proposal, and that's coming. It's going to the big thing there is to lower the rates so that so that everyone has lower rates. In order to do that, we stand at risk of losing lots of deductions, whether it's municipal bonds or energy efficiency or low-income housing. We've been told by Senator Hatch's staff that everything is on the table when it comes to what has to be potentially in play in order to get those rates lower. We were told there's going to be a big infrastructure bill, and we're looking forward to seeing what that's all about. $1 trillion over 10 years, trillion with a T. I never thought we'd actually be talking about a program that started with a T. They've got a lot of work to do on that. They've got to figure out where the money comes from, and also for us, one of the key issues is how much is going to be on the P3 side, public-private partnerships, meaning loans, grants, credits, subsidies, as opposed to the kinds of traditional dollars that we're used to in the granting system. The third big one, of course, was repeal and replace Obamacare. We're kind of on a track now where, since repeal is actually very easy because they can, through manipulation of some of the budget rules, repeal can be done with just 51 votes in the Senate, not the 60 that you need for everything else. But they have really fallen short on the replace. And so we're now in a process, and you'll see this evolve over the next few weeks, we're in a process where replace is going to become repair. So it may be repeal and repair or something along those lines. We're also, I think, on a longer time frame that is probably no longer within the 100-day scenario. And of course, immigration was always in there, and trade was always in there. So let's look at where we are now from January 20 through today, February 7th. In my handy-dandy notebook, this whole middle section is executive orders that the administration has put out. Executive, it's an omnibus term I'm using. They're either executive orders, presidential memoranda, which have the effect of executive orders, or executive actions, which is also very similar. The ones that we're dealing with right now that relate to us in one form or another, the sanctuary cities, and we're deeply concerned about this, and as you know, we've written about it. Every city in the country stands at the risk of being not self-naming itself a sanctuary city, but being named a sanctuary city by the Department of Homeland Security. This first executive order asks the Department Secretary of Homeland Security to define what is appropriate local compliance, either a local police or sheriff's department with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And if you fail to achieve the compliance that they've defined as appropriate, and this is an instruction to develop this, as it's going to happen probably over the next couple of months, then you risk being named a quote-unquote sanctuary city and being defunded. And so this is in effect a program that the Secretary of DHS has been asked to put together, and so we'll be watching that very closely and trying to get to work with them on this to see what.
Len, excuse me, Mr. Chair, can I ask a question? I'm just afraid I'll forget.
Oh, no, please.
If you, so with that defunding, does that mean like across the board, do we think, in terms of?
Excellent question. The executive order, leaves a lot of running room there, a lot of wiggle room. It says defunding, except that which would affect public safety. So you could theoretically argue that, well, okay, you'll get defunded, but you won't lose your COPS grants. But
is that like Section 8 housing? And
well,
that
it could
kind of thing?
absolutely.
CDBG?
And then you get into constitutional questions about, and I actually have, some of the mayor's offices have just been great, and we're all kind of working together and sharing this. But there's people that actually think that would be unconstitutional to tie your housing funds to your compliance with a Department of Homeland Security rule. And there are other constitutional questions that goes. I actually have the Constitution right on my desk now. It works because we're looking at the Fourth Amendment of self-incrimination. If a Salt Lake Police Department starts, going to acting like an ICE agent, are they asking someone that's been stopped for a speeding ticket that may be undocumented to be in a self-incrimination. You have the 10th Amendment, the separation of powers, the delegation to the states. So this thing is a potential mess and court case like we've seen in some of the others. So we have the travel ban, which I think they're arguing in the courts right now on a number of different issues. There's a it took one page of paper to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It took about 3 pages to do a federal hiring freeze with some exceptions. There's an executive order out there to minimize any burdens that the ACA, that Obamacare is causing in any number of ways. There's an executive order, in effect, the President of the United States instructing both the State Department and the Army, respectively, Department of the Army Corps within the Army, respectively, to approve both the Keystone Pipeline and the Dakota Access Pipeline. And essentially, the executive order says, get to yes. And on Dakota, they announced, I think probably about an hour before that they've gotten to yes on Dakota. And so the Army Corps of Engineers will now process all of the what they need to do on that. There's another executive order on environmental review. Anyone that thinks they have a project that is significant enough can now ask the federal agency involved to accelerate their environmental review, which could cause all kinds of questions. There's an executive order that puts in place the process that gets to the beginning of the building of the wall. And there's an executive order that just came out on Friday, which is the 1-for-2 on the environment, which on regulations, which says, and this goes across the board for all federal agencies, every new regulation has to be accompanied by the retirement of 2 existing regulations, so that the cost of the new regulation is always going to be net zero, because whatever cost is incurred by the new regulation is offset by the retiring of the 2 regulations. I don't know how you do that in a complicated federal world that we're in. I want to talk just for a minute, if I can, about the budget. We are now almost 6 months into fiscal 17 federal, and we do not have a budget. The continuing resolution that we have expires on April 28th, so they will have to try to figure that out. We've been just on flat continuation of FY16 levels so far, and that'll probably more than likely continue to the end of fiscal 17 on September 30. Fiscal 18 is what I'm really worried about, and I just want to use my handy-dandy prop. This is a 137-page collection of budget cuts put together by the Heritage Foundation called Blueprint for Reform, a Comprehensive Policy Agenda for a New Administration in 2017. Now, the fact is, and I neglected to mention this before, that this is the slowest administration, even though there's been the flurry of all these executive actions, this is the slowest administration in modern history in terms of staffing up. So including OMB, where the director almost a month into the administration is not maybe he'll get confirmed next week, but that means in all of these agencies, what I call the factory floor, the assistant secretaries, the deputies, and the deputy assistants, they're nowhere near in place yet. So one of our concerns is that when the administration submits its fiscal 18 budget, which will be late, they're actually, by statute, they're supposed to be submitting it this week. They're not even close to beginning to be ready, so that there's no penalty for missing the deadline. So they will submit that budget probably the first week in May, and our deep concern is that it will be a federal official version of this document. This calls for the, if you just name a favorite program or name a program that's been effective on the federal side in Salt Lake City, and I can guarantee you almost that it's in there for elimination. Commerce Department, EDA, Minority Business, Education Department, almost all grant programs, almost all the renewable programs in energy, Head Start in HHS, Obamacare, of course, our FEMA grants in Homeland, CDBG completely, Section 8, just give it to the states, same thing with VASH for our veterans, get rid of Land and Water Conservation Fund, get rid of employment and training, get rid of all of our FTA programs. There's no place for them in the federal government according to this. So everything that helped us build tracks over the years, everything that pays for that pays 80% of the cost of our new buses and any new buses that we get, gone. Same thing for the monthly or the annual grants that we get under the Airport Improvement Program for our airport, privatize air traffic control. It's a fairly serious and you would say, and I left out, of course, eliminate in EPA. I like it's a package deal. Eliminate both the grants and the regulations. So it's fairly drastic, and I think it's going to be very serious. If you remember some of our early reports after the election, we were talking about these quote unquote landing teams that would go into the agency from the campaign to sort of sort out what was going on. An enormous number of the landing team members were actually heritage staffers, so we think that there's going to be, this document has legs, which is a frightening prospect, but we'll see what happens when they get there. So that gives us a basic idea of what we're facing in the months ahead. What's new is, and I can tell you, a lot of these ideas have been kicking around since the Reagan era, but what's new is now they're coming from this new White House that considers itself to have a mandate. The OMB director, coming with his Tea Party roots as a budget hawk, we know is going to be enthusiastic about this. We have one party control, which makes its passage more likely, at least in some form. So we're going to have to fight these things out on a project-by-project program, project-by-project process. So that means as we think in terms of our own individual priorities within the city, transit, homelessness, affordable housing, climate change, energy efficiency, air quality, public safety, even Mountain Accord, our role as a welcoming city, early childhood education, everything that we do out of the annual CDBG program, all of it is potentially at risk. We will look, as we always do, to our delegation, for some help. Senator Hatch and Lee and Congressman Bishop, Chaffetz, Stewart, and Congresswoman Love. Senator Hatch is outside of the leaders like McConnell and Paul Ryan. He's probably the most influential member of Congress, as the chairman of the most important committee in the Congress, and of course is third in line for the presidency. So much of what we've been talking about in the few minutes I've been up here actually flows right through his Senate Finance Committee. So we hope to work with him and his team to sort of elevate some of our priorities to see if we can do that. We started that process when the mayor was in D.C. a couple of weeks ago and had a good sit down with his top staffer on all these issues. Senator Lee is growing in seniority and will be involved in from his committees in both energy issues, natural resources, judiciary. The immigration stuff will flow through his committee. Congressman Bishop maintains his chairmanship of natural resources. That'll mean the Mountain Accord and federal lands. Congressman Chaffetz has been actually our leader and has been trying to get our internet parity, our Marketplace Fairness Act done. Congressman Stewart is an appropriator. Congresswoman Love is on the committee that has oversight of HUD. So all of them are in a position to help. And the question is, can we isolate some of these issues and make them priorities within the delegation and elsewhere? And we'll see what happens. We're not working alone on this, obviously. We're on a daily basis. I get the chance to work with other people in D.C. who are working for individual cities, whether it's L.A. or Chicago or New York or Boston. Your membership in the National League of Cities and the mayors and the U.S. Conference of Mayors are very helpful. As I mentioned, the mayor's trip in January was great. She'll be back in for a couple of days in March. You guys I know a bunch of you are coming. Those are all important. And
so other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was the play?
That's why they said Merry Christmas, to me. So just to wrap up, I think it's going to be a fight. And as Churchill said, "Do not let us speak of dark days. Let us speak rather of stern days." So I think we've got our work cut out for us, but I think we're not alone. Federal government's not going anywhere. There are professionals, I think, within the federal government who will be there that will be pointing out that a lot of the things that the new administration wants to do is not practical and can't be done or is at odds with his existing statute or practice. So I look forward very much to coming back in next year and saying that our worst fears were not realized, and here's how it happened. And I think all of us working together, I think, is how that process begins. So happy to take any questions, and thanks again for
Lynn, thank you very much for that inspiring and optimistic update. I know that there will be several of us in Washington in March for the National League of Cities and Towns. So we look forward to meeting you then. Until then, we're going to be lining up and taking turns slamming our head in the door. So you're welcome to join us if you'd like to do that. If not, I don't think there are any questions. So thank you very much for your time, and some of us will be seeing you in March.
Thank you very much.
And best of luck.
Acting
and
Chair,
keep up the good fight.
And if it feels bad, we're always available on the phone. We're open 24/7. Just call us.
Okay, so the Len Simon Therapy Hotline. Okay, I might take you up on it.
We're there for you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So we have one more item on our work session agenda. It's the legislative briefing. I saw Lynn Pace a minute ago, but now I don't see him. Is he in the back? So as soon as Lynn and David are here, we will do the legislative briefing, and then we will I'll entertain a motion to enter into a closed session.
So moved.
Well, not yet.
Oh.
We're gonna do the legislative briefing
I'm just ready to
first.
go.
Yeah. Either way, we need Lynn and David, so let's do the legislative. That's okay. So we're going to do the legislative briefing first, and then we'll go into the closed session. So Lynn Pace, advisor to the mayor, David Litvack, deputy chief of staff. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you, as always. Much more happening, and a couple of things that we will need some feedback on. So this is in no particular order, so this is not well rehearsed. I think you got the email I sent you on short-term rental properties. There is a bill proposed that would basically preempt any local zoning or local prohibition on the short-term rental of property.
Is the bill out yet, or is it still?
House Bill 253.
It is out. Okay.
Representative Notwell. It would prohibit us from prohibiting short-term rental of property for owner-occupied property. Representative Notwell thinks that is most reasonable because you avoid all of the mischief when the owner is in the home, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll need to know what you think about that in fairly short order.
Has it been scheduled for committee yet?
No, but by the time it gets scheduled, we'll have less than 24 hours to respond.
Yeah.
So.
Lynn, does he realize that nobody's going to rent an Airbnb if somebody's living there at that time?
Well, it is designed to allow you to rent a room, not to rent your whole home. So that's the concession he believes he has made.
So would that apply to ADUs as well?
His bill is a short-term rental of property, meaning no more than 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
So an ADU would be open-ended, right?
No, I mean,
Not necessarily.
you have an ADU on your property or a mother-in-law apartment, you can still do an Airbnb in that because you live there.
Yep.
Yes, yeah, you could. What his bill, and there's still details to be negotiated, but his bill contemplates a short-term renter rather than a year-long renter in the basement.
Well, I understand I think we understand what the intention is, but I think we have to be very clear that that is ADUs are owner occupied. That's one of the conditions that we have, and I think it would be in our interest to dig into that a little bit to see what we would be prohibited from regulating if we move forward with that ADU ordinance.
Well,
Or if we need to tweak the ordinance in a way that allows us to regulate it so that, you know, one of the worst fears of ADUs is that it turns into, you know, a Airbnb rather than a housing option, and more of an investment option. And I think that this certainly seems to potentially open that door. So if there's a way that we can rework that ordinance, I think we ought to.
Well, that would be a concern. I'm assuming that the bill could be crafted so that we would still have licensing authority, inspection authority, taxing, those types of things. But he's really focused on allowing the use as an aspect of private property. So we need to, in whatever fashion, we need to have some dialogue about that, and we may be able to, may want to follow up.
Do you anticipate that it's going to be scheduled before Thursday?
I don't, but I don't know either. So
just let us know. I mean,
I don't think so, because the league is still actively working with Representative Notwell to, so I would be surprised if it's scheduled.
So we're still scheduled to have the legislative committee meet on Tuesday or Thursday at noon. So if something comes up before that, we can, you know, please let us know. But, you know, in the meantime, we'll definitely add that to the agenda to talk about.
The other bill that I brought to your attention is one dealing with historic districts. It's just a gift that keeps on giving. And that is, this is not a bill that addresses any of the creation or the formation of a district, but what it does address is the decision-making process when a historic district or property has been identified. And this is a horror story coming out of Logan, so we're not the poster child. But they had some friction, and so Representative Webb has proposed a bill. His initial bill said that the Historic Landmark Commission was advisory only, and that all of their decisions would have to be ratified by somebody else, Planning Commission, City Council. We came back to him and persuaded him that holding every decision hostage was a mistake, but it would slow down the process and make it more difficult, and that only really the contentious ones needed to be addressed. So he revised his bill to provide that the Historic Landmark Commission could remain a decision-making body, but when there is an appeal, that appeal, they will have 30 days to appeal instead of 10, which is what every other land use decision is. And second, that appeal would go to the governing body of the municipality. What he really wanted to do was to send those appeals to the City Council, because he thinks that the City Council will be reasonable and make more balanced decisions. We had to inform him that in our form of government in particular, that administrative decisions don't go to the legislative body. So the bill has been drafted to say that the decision would go to the governing body of the jurisdiction, depending on what your form of government is. And in my conversations with our attorney's office, we're of the opinion that that means that these appeals would go then to the mayor. That's not exactly what we want, but that is, that's where he retreated to after we told him not to hold hostage every decision. So the bill has passed out of the House. It's now in the Senate. And that's where that dialogue is, unless there is further mischief along the way, which, of course, with historic districts is always possible. Another bill that you should be aware of is Senate Bill 174, which is a bill that would completely restructure the governing board of the Utah Transit Authority. It would take the existing 16-member board that is appointed in a blend of combinations between sales tax contributed and population, and create a 9-member board that would be entirely based upon population. And those appointments would be, there's an appointment formula, but they would be confirmed by the Senate. And then it would also create a task force. Oh, it would also prohibit UTA from doing any transit-oriented development. So they would be limited just to transit. They couldn't do the accompanying development. And it would also create a task force to study the governance and financing involved in roadway transportation, transit, and aeronautics. And what that means is they would study the governing structure and financing of UDOT, UTA, and the airport. So that's Senator Harper's bill. That's just been introduced. I think there's going to be quite a bit more dialogue about that bill. But those are some interesting details that you should be aware of. There are a number of, there were several RDA bills that were proposed. One of them is purely a cleanup, sort of a technical cleanup from last year's major overhaul. There were 2 bills today that were directed at either prohibiting the school districts from participating at all or limiting them to 50% of their available tax increment. The committee elected to move on to the next item on the agenda. It's pretty clear that I don't think either of those bills have legs, but there's certainly more attention on RDAs and tax increment. As I mentioned, there's also a bill dealing with, it hasn't been introduced yet, dealing with food trucks and trying to establish more uniformity between jurisdictions, so they don't have to get multiple licenses and inspections in every jurisdiction where they stop and sell food. I think what other highlights there are. Anyway, if you have questions, by all means, chime in. I'm just trying to hit the highlights as I recall. A couple positive bills. Well, we put out lots of fires that didn't grow into anything ugly. I mean, there were like dozens of those, but I didn't keep track of those.
First of all, do any of you have any questions? While you're thinking, if you have questions, where are we with the watershed bills?
We've had quite a bit of dialogue. There's probably, I don't know, 10, 12 water bills. The bill that we were most concerned, the issue we were most concerned about was an effort that would have changed Salt Lake City's extraterritorial jurisdiction. It appears that the parties that were most interested in that dialogue have been
Simmered.
Yeah, the heat has subsided, and while I don't think the issue has gone away, I think the likelihood of having a bill addressing that issue this session has likely gone away. Now, we could get surprised, but in all of the people that we have spoken to, all of the key players, all of them have said, we're interested in the issue, but we have no intention of running legislation this year, which I think is very good news for us. Other questions?
Okay, Andrew?
This is more of an executive question, but Governor Herbert in the League of Cities and Counties meeting this past fall, I can't remember when it was, said very, very clearly in answer to a question that he did not support the state legislature usurping local authority, period. Now, I know it's a case-by-case basis, but has there been any discussion out of the governor's office on any bills that seem to take issue with local jurisdiction authority and weighing in on those kind of issues at all?
I have not had any meetings with the governor's office relative to that issue. I don't know that you have.
The mayor and I met with the governor last week, some general conversation about key priority issues, homelessness, airport, Northwest Quadrant, but we did not discuss any specific bills. But he did emphasize again with us the importance of local control and local government as a partner with the state. But as you know, it is case by case, and and what issues he's willing to either publicly oppose or threaten veto on will be looked at closely, each bill.
Yeah, I will also add, while I appreciate the governor's, I don't remember the specific comments, but there are many legislators who certainly will give lip service to local control, but then in the same sentence mention why this item is an exception to that. And so while I think the governor is sincere in his comments, that doesn't necessarily preclude a compelling reason why a particular bill or a particular item might justify a different response. So it is something that we are certainly concerned about. I mean, there's no question that being the capital city, that where so many people deal with the city but they don't live here, there are lots of people who are interested in what happens in Salt Lake City who feel that they don't have necessarily, they may not call a member of the city council or the mayor. They may simply call their legislator as their representative. And that's how those issues get raised. And I, as often as I can, I say to people, if you have a concern, if you have an issue, I want to know about it, let us know so we can address it. So I'm not exaggerating when I said to David, I said just a moment ago, that we've put out dozens of fires. That's absolutely true. I mean, we are very, very successful in minimizing 90% of the challenges that arise. but there's a narrow range that are very troublesome or have significant interest behind them, but become very challenging to try and resolve. So,
Andrew, do you have a follow-up? No. James?
What was the bill for the historic districts?
House Bill 30.
And
Representative
then
Well, there were two, though. There was the one with that dealt with the Historic Landmarks Commission, but then there was a local historic district bill, but that was just the way that I read it was just a cleanup.
Yeah, House Bill
Bill, it wasn't really
188
anything.
was just a technical cleanup bill that Brad Wilson ran. It's still in process. And House Bill 30 is the one that would change the appeal authority from essentially an administrative law judge, in this case, to the governing body of the municipality.
So in your late night emails that you send out, I was reading it late at night, right? Or early in the morning. So
With a grain of salt, it was drafted late at night, too. So.
my question is the sign ordinance, what the legislation that they were looking at pushing, what is that all about? And how would that
Well,
affect Salt Lake?
Will you explain it a little bit? You put a no, yes, or something like that. There was
Yeah,
a
there
term
is-
that I
that's
didn't
why
get
I
what
want a
it
little
meant.
clarification.
There is a growing, this has grown over several years, and that is that there is a growing desire for signage either associated with a public assembly facility, like the Delta Center, or like the E-Center, or Maverick Center, or the Rio Tinto Stadium. That's scenario number one, where they want to be able to advertise more broadly than just what is typically on premise. So that's one issue. The other issue is you'll get what we call unified development signs, where you have a business park or something and they want one large sign, particularly right next to the freeway, that advertises everything in the business park. That came to a head with the sign for the Maverick Center and the sign for the Rio Tinto Stadium. A few years ago, the legislature crafted a very small exception to deal with those, and that was it. The next year, or 2 years later, the people down at Traverse Ridge, right at the point of the mountain, erected an enormous sign without bothering to check where it could be built. And so they'd made literally a several $million investment building the sign in the wrong spot in terms of its proximity to the freeway. The legislature came back last year and created an exemption that would allow them to keep that sign, but they, in trying to craft that narrowly enough that it wouldn't affect anybody but this one sign, it was narrowly crafted. It excluded Salt Lake County, and it was very narrowly drawn. What's happened now is that various municipalities have other similar signs, particularly development projects that might have a roadway through them, where there's a fight between the sign authorized by the city and those who make their living selling off-premise advertising. And so the billboard companies think that these signs are competing with their business unfairly, and so they have raised the issue. And so the legislature has come back and said, well, we can't use that tool inside Salt Lake County because it excludes it. So they want to broaden that tool for two purposes. One, to allow broader signage at public event arenas. Two, to allow the city, the local municipality, to determine what kind of unified signage is appropriate for a commercial development, even if there are streets running through it. So you consolidate all of your signs onto, 2 or 3 major signs instead of everybody having their own. And that would, the way the bill has been structured, it has not been released yet, but I've seen drafts of it and I've given my comments. But the way the bill is structured is that it would leave that authority with the local jurisdiction, but those who make their living selling off-premise advertising are fighting over that bill. Does that make sense?
May I ask you a question about that? I know there was a big electronic sign that went on the parking structure over here on 3rd South that I believe was maybe owned by Rail Salt Lake. I'm not sure. It was huge electronic, and
They own the park. Deloy Hansen owns the building and the parking structure, so. Yeah.
so, and it was,
And the sign is still there.
does that impact that sort of thing?
Well, you're getting into a different issue. One of the challenges, the bill that is being run would say it is not an off-premise sign if, for instance, suppose the city created a unified development project at City Creek, right? We would have 2 city blocks with a street running through the middle of it. But we might have created specialized signage for that project, right? And whatever we approved, we would have then deemed as being on-premise signage because it was on the premise of the project. Well, if you advertise Nordstrom over on State Street, it's across the street from the building.
Right.
And so there were those who were arguing that that sign is off-premise because Nordstrom's is on the other side of the street. And so this bill would say, if the city creates the district and authorizes the signage for that district, it's deemed to be on-premise even if you have streets running through it. That's what the bill does. Now, the issue you're addressing on the signage locally, I will tell you, we have a disconnect in our ordinance, okay? And that is, we have a billboard ordinance that prohibits digital signage in Salt Lake City. But our on-premise ordinance does not prohibit digital signage. So now, on a project like the one on 3rd South, where you have a high-rise building and that parking garage, all of which qualify for signage, the amount of signage you can get for a building that big is really large. And if it's on-premise, it can be digital. And so that on-premise digital sign is hard to justify when you say that billboards, which are typically very large, can't be. So we just have a disconnect in our ordinance that we have not yet resolved, and that's a task, the attorneys and the council can talk about on another day. But that's the issue that you're finding here.
Because I know that one of the issues with that was that it was reflecting off the building across the street into the windows of the people who have homes on top of the Celtic Bank building. And that was I heard about that really a lot because I know people who live there. Anyway, so I just wondered if that played into it. But thank you for explaining on and off for me.
Okay, any other questions for Lynn or David?
Councilmember Luke, could I just mention a couple, in all seriousness, a couple positive developments, the legislature?
If they're positive, yes.
Okay, good. Representative Becky Edwards is carrying legislation on affordable housing, which is the key legislation coming out of the Lieutenant Governor's task force this last year. That legislation has made it through the House and through the Senate committee. It is on the Senate floor and will stay on the Senate floor until the budget of that bill is decided at the very end of the session. Quick highlights: what that bill does is one, it appropriates funding for a state tax credit to be used along with the federal income tax credit for affordable housing projects at 30% of AMI or below. And then it also creates a loan fund, which interestingly enough, I just learned this last week, is modeled after our housing trust fund. So they see something that's very successful that we are doing, and they are taking that statewide. So very positive developments there. A couple other quick highlights. Yesterday, Department of Workforce Services presented the governor's budget request for $3.5 million of one-time funding for the homelessness initiative to the social services appropriation. I understand it's prioritized pretty high there. That's not to say that is what our request, county and our request will be, but very positive by being in the governor's budget, is that it allows the Department of Workforce Services to be engaged partners as we move forward. Very positive reception with that funding request. And then lastly, Representative Romero's legislation on rape kit testing statewide has passed a committee and is awaiting debate on the full floor.
Great. All right, well, thank you both very much. At this point, I'll look for a motion to enter into closed session.
For property acquisition?
For Margaret, what is the?
It's for advice of legal counsel and strategy discussions concerning real property.
And is tonight the night we have a security component also? Sorry.
I've forgotten that. And
Awesome.
also for a security briefing.
I move for all those.
Okay, does he have to restate those? Margaret? Does he have to formally restate the reason?
As long as they're in the record. So
Okay.
advice of legal counsel strategy concerning acquisition of real property and security briefing.
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
motion by Councilmember Rogers.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Adams. We'll roll call this. James?
Yes.
Aaron? Lisa?
Yes.
Derek?
Yes.
Andrew? I'm a yes. Okay, we are in closed session. There is
Welcome to another edition of Capital City News, your connection to Salt Lake City government. I'm your host, Poonam Kumar, and I'm at the Utah State Capitol, which will become a very active place during the legislative session beginning on January 23rd. For this week's episode, we'll be talking to Salt Lake City Police Chief Mike Brown about something very near and dear to his heart. And our History Minute is about a famous silent actor named Max Swain. But first, let's start with our legislative update and look back. The City Council has been working hard on its priorities for the 2017 state legislative session. Some priorities include funding for homeless facilities and services, affordable housing, watershed protection, internet sales tax, and more. Eve Winterfest returned to downtown Salt Lake City to ring in the new year with a 20-foot wide mirror ball drop. The multi-day celebration of art and culture featured events and activities for the entire family, ranging from bounce houses to live entertainment, laser shows, and more. Where Children Sleep is a new exhibit at the Leonardo, which reveals a series of photographs of children and their bedrooms from many different countries and circumstances. Mayor Biskupski attended the opening press event where she spoke about the importance of partnerships in addressing housing needs in the city. Salt Lake City and the Economic Development Corporation of Utah announced national outdoor products company Big Agnes, who produces award-winning sleeping bags and tents, will be expanding its operation along the Wasatch Front. The company's new domestic distribution center will be located at 1810 South, 4370 West in Salt Lake City. Making sure Salt Lake City is a welcoming city is a top priority here. Salt Lake City Police Chief Mike Brown talks to us about his department's commitment to ensuring safety for all residents.
Immigration is a hot topic right now, not only nationally, but locally here in Salt Lake City. And I have to say, following the election, we had some of our communities, some of our immigrant communities, very fearful and scared. And wondering what was going to happen with the immigration policies nationally as well as locally here in Salt Lake City. And so one thing that we've done very strong and very open and transparent is that we will not change our immigration policy. We will not go out and do federal immigration enforcement. And I think that's important to tell those people who are actually keeping their kids home from school, that are afraid to really ask these important questions. And so I think as far as a police department and a city, we need to get out in front of this and let them know that, number one, we won't enforce it, and number two, we shouldn't enforce it. I mean, when you really think about it, immigration enforcement is a civil issue. It's a civil matter. Can you imagine your police department going out and enforcing tax laws? Well, it's almost the same. Why would we go out and enforce immigration? So, with that being said, we have worked so hard to develop trust and confidence within the communities, all communities here in Salt Lake City, and especially the immigrant communities. So if we were to go out and even hint that we were going to enforce immigration, that would destroy that trust and that confidence that we have worked so hard to build. If anybody has questions, if anybody is living in fear, if anybody needs to be reassured, I want them to know they can call me personally. They can call Chief Mike Brown. I will take their call. I will meet with them. We can have meetings. We can meet with our communities. We can set up meetings wherever you want to sit down and talk about this very important issue. I just want people to know that their chief and their police department stands behind them, and we're here to protect and serve all communities within Salt Lake City.
And now it's time for a History Minute.
Born in Salt Lake City in 1876, Moroni Mac Swain took an early interest in the theatrical arts. At the age of 6, he created his own show called Mac Swain's Mammoth Minstrels. At 8, he stole all of the linens in the house to create his own circus tent. By 15, he ran away from home to join a traveling minstrel show. His mother caught up to him by his first performance to take him back home to Salt Lake, but he was adamant that show business was going to be his life. To that end, he ended up one of the most familiar faces in Hollywood. After a number of stock appearances, he ended up at Keystone, making many comedies with them. There, he developed a character named Mr. Ambrose, who would get into all kinds of chases, and most films would end up with him getting a pie in the face. He was also one of the famous Keystone Cops. It was at this studio where he met Charlie Chaplin and how he got the job playing Big Jim McKay in the film he's still most remembered for, Chaplin's The Gold Rush. In it, he plays a down-on-his-luck miner so hungry he imagines that Chaplin is good enough to eat. Swain worked in Hollywood up until 1935 when he retired to Washington State and passed away that same year. Today, Swain's star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame can still be seen at 1500 Vine Street.
Well, that's it for this episode of Capital City News. Thanks for watching. For SLC TV, I'm Poonam Kumar, signing off from the beautiful Utah State Capitol building. Welcome to another episode of Capital City News, your connection to Salt Lake City government. I'm your host, Poonam Kumar, updating you from the historic Tower Theater, located in the 9th and 9th neighborhood. Known for screening independent films, the Tower Theater is also a venue for the upcoming Sundance Film Festival, which begins on January 19th. For this week's episode, we'll be learning more from Laura Fritz, the city's Economic Development Director. And our History Minute is about this unique gem behind me. But first, let's start with our legislative update and look back. More than 150 people attended the City Council meeting earlier this month, where dozens of individuals expressed concerns about the locations for 4 new homeless resource centers. Since then, the city has had a number of public feedback opportunities and community workshops. Another workshop will be held on Wednesday, January 18th at 7 p.m. at Nibley Park Elementary School, located at 2785 South, 800 East. The City Council elected new leadership. Stan Penfold will serve as chair of the council, and Charlie Luke will serve as vice chair. Penfold represents District 3 and served as vice chair in 2016. Luke represents District 6. The council also approved the appointment of Carl Lieb as the new fire chief of Salt Lake City, and a budget amendment, which will include funding for the 2017 Twilight Concert Series. New this year, Mayor Jackie Biskupski announced Salt Lake City will now offer its full-time employees 6 weeks paid parental leave for mothers, fathers, adoptive, and foster parents. While the United States stands alone as the only industrialized nation to not offer paid parental leave, Salt Lake City now joins a handful of cities and counties to offer this unique benefit. Salt Lake City launched an innovative startup housing and business development project on 2.3 acres of city-owned property. The site of the old Barnes Bank building, next to the Public Safety building, will now be home to larger affordable housing units, including micro-unit apartments, business incubator space, and ground-level retail. With winter comes the height of the inversion season. Salt Lake City employees joined Mayor Jackie Biskupski to take action in reducing emissions by committing to the Clear Air Challenge. Many employees will use public transit or carpool at minimum at least once a week. The public can do the same. To learn more on how you can help clear the air, visit slcgreen.com/air. Forbes lists Utah as #1 for best states for business, and Salt Lake City plays a major role in achieving that status. Laura Fritz, Salt Lake City's Director of Economic Development, is here to tell us more about what's on the horizon.
I'm Laura Fritz. I'm the new Director of the Department of Economic Development for Salt Lake City Corporation. I've spent over 20 years in economic development, so economic development really is the lifeblood of any city. We are the opportunity for revenue for the city, which allows us to have great amenities, but it's also the opportunity for job creation and economic investment and bringing back vitality to communities. I often say that people want to live in really cool places, and so how do we make Salt Lake City a really cool and vibrant and special place? I think the most exciting thing about this new department is that there has been great political support for economic development in the city. The mayor's vision has been to create a vibrant economic development department. And within that department, we have 3 divisions. We have the Business Development Division, which again does our recruit, retain, expand, help businesses get started, the Arts Council, and then the Redevelopment Agency. And so combining those resources, combining that talent, and making sure that we're sharing information and overlapping those resources, we believe will make for a very powerful economic development program. The largest win that we've had this year has been UPS, with over 1 million square feet of new development that will be occurring. We also have been fortunate to have Post Cereals, which has been a recent win. Again, that's over 900,000 square feet of new space that will be built. It's actually the largest build-to-suit project in Utah, so that's pretty exciting. We've also had some smaller wins. We've had a bike component company. We've had Stryker Medical locate here. So, we're really excited about the companies that are choosing Salt Lake City, and there's more to come. So in the first 6 months of this department, I am so proud of our team and the work that we've been able to accomplish. We've had several big wins. We've had a number of small wins too. What we're really excited about is the over $300 million that companies are planning to invest in our city. I truly believe that companies vote with their dollars. And the fact that companies are voting on Salt Lake City and are making that investment here, I think is amazing, and we want that momentum to continue. Economic development cannot be done in a vacuum. Everything we do has to be done in partnership. And if we share those resources and we share our collective experiences, we can only be successful.
And next up is our History Minute.
The Tower Theater has been a fixture in the 9th and 9th neighborhood since its opening on January 8, 1928. It began as a silent film palace complete with a Kilgen Wonder organ. It gets its name from its original design, crafted to resemble the Tower of London. By 1930, the tower became Tower Talkies when they installed state-of-the-art projectors, and it became a mainstay in Salt Lake City. It also had the distinction of becoming the first air-conditioned theater in the city. By 1950, new owners took over and changed the facade to something more modern and added the Tower House Coffee and Ice Cream Shop. Over the years, the tower began to crumble, and it looked like it might not be saved. But the Salt Lake Film Society was formed in 2001 to preserve its legacy. They refurbished the theater, put in the best art film rental library in the state, and have remained an important fixture in the Salt Lake City art scene. Each year, it serves as a venue for the Sundance Film Festival and has seen more than its fair share of Hollywood glamour. And today, it remains the oldest operating movie house in the state.
That's it for this episode of Capital City News. Thanks for watching. For SLC TV, I'm Poonam Kumar, signing off from inside the Tower Theater. Thanks for watching Capital City News, your connection to Salt Lake City government. I'm your host, Poonam Kumar. For this week's episode of Capital City News, we'll be talking to Sophia Nicholas with the city's Department of Sustainability about ways we can help clear the air. And our History Minute is about Utah's 15th governor, Olene Walker. Let's start off with our legislative update and look back. Board members of the Redevelopment Agency of Salt Lake City have chosen Derek Kitchen as the vice chair for 2017. This is Kitchen's second consecutive year as vice chair. He serves in leadership with Lisa Adams, whose 2-year term as chair finishes at the end of this year. The board is made up of members of the City Council. Throughout the month of January, the city welcomed public input on building design, safety and security issues, and more on 4 new homeless resource centers at a series of workshops, community council, and city council meetings. To share your input, visit Open City Hall at peakdemocracy.com/4278. The next public opportunity to provide comments will be held on Tuesday, February 7th at 7 p.m. at the next City Council formal meeting. On the opening day of the Utah legislative session, over 6,000 people filled the Utah State Capitol Rotunda, following the National Women's March to call out attention to local women's rights issues, discrimination, sexual assault prevention, and more. The event was one of the largest Capitol demonstrations in Salt Lake City. Longtime business leader and philanthropist Tom Guinea was presented with a key to the city from Mayor Jackie Biskupski for his 36 years of building community, historic preservation work, and ongoing leadership in the Salt Lake City restaurant industry. During the winter months, Salt Lake City experiences red alert days, better known as inversion. And oftentimes this can lead to major air pollution and health effects. Sophia Nicholas, communications manager for the city sustainability department, is here to share with us how we can help clear the air.
The city has really taken air quality seriously. Every time we have an inversion, our air pollution doubles in the valley. And so we need to do everything we can internally and externally to encourage folks to reduce their contribution to the air. So for the city, that means reducing the amount of driving, reducing the emissions from our fleet vehicles, improving our energy efficiency, and promoting renewables. Individuals really can make a difference to our air quality. Sometimes it's really frustrating to look out into the muck and not see the mountains and just feel like you really can't help us, but our air pollution really is comprised of many different sources. And so the biggest things that you can do as an individual are to avoid driving alone in your car, and there are a lot of ways you can do that, to reduce the emissions coming from your home, whether that's through not burning wood or making sure your furnace is tuned up and running well. The one thing that people don't necessarily realize is that the products that they use in their home, whether they're personal care products or cleaning supplies or other type of home repair products, actually put out volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, and those add up to some of the particulate pollution that we see in our inversions in the winter. And so as much as you can, avoid using aerosols for your hairspray or your room freshener or carpet cleaner and whatnot. And if you have any questions about the products that you want to use that are lower emission, you can go to the EPA's website. I think it's Safer Choice Products, and those will provide some low emissions options, including low VOC paints. If you want to learn more and find out how you can make a difference, go to slcgreen.com. We have an air quality menu that talks more about what you can do, and then if you'd like to remind yourself about what we're doing, you can click on that there. The other great resource is UCAIR, and that's ucair.org, and they have just done a fantastic job really breaking it down for people and how they can make a difference.
Next up is our History Minute.
Olene Walker, the first female governor of the state of Utah, was born Olene Smith in 1930. She received a bachelor's degree at Brigham Young University, her master's at Stanford, and completed her doctorate at the University of Utah, making her the only Utah governor to hold a PhD. Before she took her post as governor, she served in the state legislature for 8 years before deciding to run for Congress. It was in the midst of her burgeoning campaign that Mike Leavitt asked her to run as his lieutenant governor in the 1992 election. She decided she'd be able to do more good for the cause of education as lieutenant governor and accepted that post, abandoning her congressional run. For 10 years, she served as lieutenant governor fighting for education causes. When Governor Leavitt left office, she filled his vacancy, serving as the first female governor until 2005. During her time, she focused on bettering education, helping defeat school voucher legislation, and created early reading initiatives that had her at odds with the legislature. After she left office, she created the Olene S. Walker School of Politics and Public Service at Weber State University, and the state honored her by naming the Olene Walker Housing Loan Fund to help low-income Utahns find affordable housing. She passed away at the age of 85 in 2015.
That's it for another episode of Capital City News. Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to learn more about how you can help reduce the air pollution, visit slcgreen.com. For SLC TV, I'm Poonam Kumar. Happy New Year and welcome to another edition of Capital City News, your connection to Salt Lake City government. I'm your host, Poonam Kumar, and I'm at the Utah State Capitol, which will become a very active place during the legislative session beginning on January 23rd. For this week's episode, we'll be talking to Salt Lake City Police Chief Mike Brown about something very near and dear to his heart. And our History Minute is about a famous silent actor named Max Swain. But first, let's start with our legislative update and look back. The City Council has been working hard on its priorities for the 2017 state legislative session. Some priorities include funding for homeless facilities and services, affordable housing, watershed protection, internet sales tax, and more. Eve Winterfest returned to downtown Salt Lake City to ring in the new year with a 20-foot wide mirror ball drop. The multi-day celebration of art and culture featured events and activities for the entire family, ranging from bounce houses to live entertainment, laser shows, and more. Where Children Sleep is a new exhibit at the Leonardo, which reveals a series of photographs of children and their bedrooms from many different countries and circumstances. Mayor Biskupski attended the opening press event where she spoke about the importance of partnerships in addressing housing needs in the city. Salt Lake City and the Economic Development Corporation of Utah announced national outdoor products company Big Agnes, who produces award-winning sleeping bags and tents, will be expanding its operation along the Wasatch Front. The company's new domestic distribution center will be located at 1810 South, 4370 West in Salt Lake City. Making sure Salt Lake City is a welcoming city is a top priority here. Salt Lake City Police Chief Mike Brown talks to us about his department's commitment to ensuring safety for all residents.
Immigration is a hot topic right now, not only nationally, but locally here in Salt Lake City. And I have to say, following the election, we had some of our communities, some of our immigrant communities, very fearful and scared. And wondering what was going to happen with the immigration policies nationally as well as locally here in Salt Lake City. And so one thing that we've done very strong and very open and transparent is that we will not change our immigration policy. We will not go out and do federal immigration enforcement. I think that's important to tell those people who are actually keeping their kids home from school, that are afraid to really ask these important questions. And so I think as far as a police department and a city, we need to get out in front of this and let them know that, number one, we won't enforce it, and number two, we shouldn't enforce it. I mean, when you really think about it, immigration enforcement is a civil issue. It's a civil matter. Can you imagine your police department going out and enforcing tax laws? Well, it's almost the same. Why would we go out and enforce immigration? So, with that being said, we have worked so hard to develop trust and confidence within the communities, all communities here in Salt Lake City, and especially the immigrant communities. So if we were to go out and even hint that we were going to enforce immigration, that would destroy that trust and that confidence that we have worked so hard to build. If anybody has questions, if anybody is living in fear, if anybody needs to be reassured, I want them to know they can call me personally. They can call Chief Mike Brown. I will take their call. I will meet with them. We can have meetings. We can meet with our communities. We can set up meetings wherever you want to sit down and talk about this very important issue. I just want people to know that their chief and their police department stands behind them, and we're here to protect and serve all communities within Salt Lake City.
And now it's time for our History Minute.
Born in Salt Lake City in 1876, Moroni Mac Swain took an early interest in the theatrical arts. At the age of 6, he created his own show called Mac Swain's Mammoth Minstrels. At 8, he stole all of the linens in the house to create his own circus. By 15, he ran away from home to join a traveling minstrel show. His mother caught up to him by his first performance to take him back home to Salt Lake, but he was adamant that show business was going to be his life. To that end, he ended up one of the most familiar faces in Hollywood. After a number of stock appearances, he ended up at Keystone, making many comedies with them. There, he developed a character named Mr. Ambrose, who would get into all kinds of chases, and most films would end up with him getting a pie in the face. He was also one of the famous Keystone Cops. It was at this studio where he met Charlie Chaplin and how he got the job playing Big Jim McKay in the film he's still most remembered for, Chaplin's The Gold Rush. In it, he plays a down-on-his-luck miner so hungry he imagines that Chaplin is good enough to eat. Swain worked in Hollywood up until 1935 when he retired to Washington State and passed away that same year. Today, Swain's star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame can still be seen at 1500 Vine Street.
Well, that's it for this episode of Capital City News. Thanks for watching. For SLC TV, I'm Poonam Kumar, signing off from the beautiful Utah State Capitol building. Welcome to another episode of Capital City News, your connection to Salt Lake City government. I'm your host, Poonam Kumar, updating you from the historic Tower Theater, located in the 9th and 9th neighborhood. Known for screening independent films, the Tower Theater is also a venue for the upcoming Sundance Film Festival, which begins on January 19th. For this week's episode, we'll be learning more from Laura Fritz, the city's Economic Development Director. And our History Minute is about this unique gem behind me. But first, let's start with our legislative update and look back. More than 150 people attended the City Council meeting earlier this month, where dozens of individuals expressed concerns about the locations for 4 new homeless resource centers. Since then, the city has had a number of public feedback opportunities and community workshops. Another workshop will be held on Wednesday, January 18th at 7 p.m. at Nibley Park Elementary School, located at 2785 South, 800 East. The City Council elected new leadership. Stan Penfold will serve as chair of the council, and Charlie Luke will serve as vice chair. Penfold represents District 3 and served as vice chair in 2016. Luke represents District 6. The council also approved the appointment of Carl Lieb as the new fire chief of Salt Lake City, and a budget amendment, which will include funding for the 2017 Twilight Concert Series. New this year, Mayor Jackie Biskupski announced Salt Lake City will now offer its full-time employees 6 weeks paid parental leave for mothers, fathers, adoptive, and foster parents. While the United States stands alone as the only industrialized nation to not offer paid parental leave, Salt Lake City now joins a handful of cities and counties to offer this unique benefit. Salt Lake City launched an innovative startup housing and business development project on 2.3 acres of city-owned property. The site of the old Barnes Bank building, next to the Public Safety building, will now be home to larger affordable housing units, including micro-unit apartments, business incubator space, and ground-level retail. With winter comes the height of the inversion season. Salt Lake City employees joined Mayor Jackie Biskupski to take action in reducing emissions by committing to the Clear Air Challenge. Many employees will use public transit or carpool at minimum at least once a week. The public can do the same. To learn more on how you can help clear the air, visit slcgreen.com/air. Forbes lists Utah as #1 for best states for business, and Salt Lake City plays a major role in achieving that status. Laura Fritz, Salt Lake City's Director of Economic Development, is here to tell us more about what's on the horizon.
I'm Laura Fritz. I'm the new Director of the Department of Economic Development for Salt Lake City Corporation. I've spent over 20 years in economic development, so economic development really is the lifeblood of any city. We are the opportunity for revenue for the city, which allows us to have great amenities, but it's also the opportunity for job creation and economic investment and bringing back vitality to communities. I often say that people want to live in really cool places, and so how do we make Salt Lake City a really cool and vibrant and special place? think the most exciting thing about this new department is that there's been great political support for economic development in the city. The mayor's vision has been to create a vibrant economic development department. And within that department, we have 3 divisions. We have the business development division, which again does our recruit, retain, expand, help businesses get started, the Arts Council, and then the redevelopment agency. And so combining those resources, combining that talent, and making sure that we're sharing information and overlapping those resources, we believe will make for a very powerful economic development program. The largest win that we've had this year has been UPS. With over 1 million square feet of new development that will be occurring. We also have been fortunate to have Post Cereals, which has been a recent win. Again, that's over 900,000 square feet of new space that will be built. It's actually the largest build-to-suit project in Utah, so that's pretty exciting. We've also had some smaller wins. We've had a bike component company. We've had Stryker Medical locate here. So, we're really excited about the companies that are choosing Salt Lake City, and there's more to come. So in the first 6 months of this department, I am so proud of our team and the work that we've been able to accomplish. We've had several big wins. We've had a number of small wins too. What we're really excited about is the over $300 million that companies are planning to invest in our city. I truly believe that companies vote with their dollars. And the fact that companies are voting on Salt Lake City and are making that investment here, I think is amazing, and we want that momentum to continue. Economic development cannot be done in a vacuum. Everything we do has to be done in partnership. And if we share those resources and we share our collective experiences, we can only be successful.
And next up is our History Minute.
The Tower Theater has been a fixture in the 9th and 9th neighborhood since its opening on January 8, 1928. It began as a silent film palace complete with a Kilgen Wonder organ. It gets its name from its original design, crafted to resemble the Tower of London. By 1930, the Tower became Tower Talkies when they installed state-of-the-art projectors, and it became a mainstay in Salt Lake City. It also had the distinction of becoming the first air-conditioned theater in the city. By 1950, new owners took over and changed the facade to something more modern and added the Tower House Coffee and Ice Cream Shop. Over the years, the tower began to crumble, and it looked like it might not be saved, but the Salt Lake Film Society was formed in 2001 to preserve its legacy. They refurbished the theater, put in the best art film rental library in the state, and have remained an important fixture in the Salt Lake City art scene. Each year, it serves as a venue for the Sundance Film Festival and has seen more than its fair share of Hollywood glamour. And today, it remains the oldest operating movie house in the state.
That's it for this episode of Capital City News. Thanks for watching. For SLC TV, I'm Poonam Kumar, signing off from inside the Tower Theater. Watching Capital City News, your connection to Salt Lake City government. I'm your host, Poonam Kumar. For this week's episode of Capital City News, we'll be talking to Sophia Nicholas with the city's Department of Sustainability about ways we can help clear the air. And our History Minute is about Utah's 15th governor, Olene Walker. Let's start off with our legislative update and look back. Board members of the Redevelopment Agency of Salt Lake City have chosen Derek Kitchen as the vice chair for 2017. This is Kitchen's second consecutive year as vice chair. He serves in leadership with Lisa Adams, whose 2-year term as chair finishes at the end of this year. The board is made up of members of the City Council. Throughout the month of January, the city welcomed public input on building design, safety and security issues, and more on 4 new homeless resource centers at a series of workshops, community council, and city council meetings. To share your input, visit Open City Hall at peakdemocracy.com/4278. The next public opportunity to provide comments will be held on Tuesday, February 7th at 7 p.m. at the next City Council formal meeting. On the opening day of the Utah legislative session, over 6,000 people filled the Utah State Capitol Rotunda, following the National Women's March to call out attention to local women's rights issues, discrimination, sexual assault prevention, and more. The event was one of the largest Capitol demonstrations in Salt Lake City. Longtime business leader and philanthropist Tom Guinea was presented with a key to the city from Mayor Jackie Biskupski for his 36 years of building community, historic preservation work, and ongoing leadership in the Salt Lake City restaurant industry. During the winter months, Salt Lake City experiences red alert days, better known as inversion. And oftentimes this can lead to major air pollution and health effects. Sophia Nicholas, communications manager for the city sustainability department, is here to share with us how we can help clear the air.
The city has really taken air quality seriously. Every time we have an inversion, our air pollution doubles in the valley. And so we need to do everything we can internally and externally to encourage folks to reduce their contribution to the air. So for the city, that means reducing the amount of driving, reducing the emissions from our fleet vehicles, improving our energy efficiency, and promoting renewables. Individuals really can make a difference to our air quality. Sometimes it's really frustrating to look out into the muck and not see the mountains and just feel like you really can't help us, but our air pollution really is comprised of many different sources. And so the biggest things that you can do as an individual are to avoid driving alone in your car, and there are a lot of ways you can do that, to reduce the emissions coming from your home, whether that's through not burning wood or making sure your furnace is tuned up and running well. The one thing that people don't necessarily realize is that the products that they use in their home, whether they're personal care products or cleaning supplies or other type of home repair products, actually put out volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, and those add up to some of the particulate pollution that we see in our inversions in the winter. And so as much as you can, avoid using aerosols for your hairspray or your room freshener or carpet cleaner and whatnot. And if you have any questions about the products that you want to use that are lower emission, you can go to the EPA's website. I think it's Safer Choice Products, and those will provide some low emissions options, including low VOC paints. If you want to learn more and find out how you can make a difference, go to slcgreen.com. We have an air quality menu that talks more about what you can do, and then if you'd like to remind yourself about what we're doing, you can click on that there. The other great resource is UCAIR, and that's ucair.org, and they have just done a fantastic job really breaking it down for people and how they can make a difference.
Next up is our History Minute.
Olene Walker, the first female governor of the state of Utah, was born Olene Smith in 1930. She received a bachelor's degree at Brigham Young University, her master's at Stanford, and completed her doctorate at the University of Utah, making her the only Utah governor to hold a PhD. Before she took her post as governor, she served in the state legislature for 8 years before deciding to run for Congress. It was in the midst of her burgeoning campaign that Mike Leavitt asked her to run as his lieutenant governor in the 1992 election. She decided she'd be able to do more good for the cause of education as lieutenant governor and accepted that post, abandoning her congressional run. For 10 years, she served as lieutenant governor fighting for education causes. When Governor Leavitt left office, she filled his vacancy, serving as the first female governor until 2005. During her time, she focused on bettering education, helping defeat school voucher legislation, and created early reading initiatives that had her at odds with the legislature. After she left office, she created the Olene S. Walker School of Politics and Public Service at Weber State University, and the state honored her by naming the Olene Walker Housing Loan Fund to help low-income Utahns find affordable housing. She passed away at the age of 85 in 2015.
That's it for another episode of Capital City News. Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like to learn more about how you can help reduce the air pollution, visit slcgreen.com. For SLC TV, I'm Poonam Kumar. Happy New Year and welcome to another edition of Capital City News, your connection to Salt Lake City government. I'm your host, Poonam Kumar, and I'm at the Utah State Capitol, which will become a very active place during the legislative session beginning on January 23rd. For this week's episode, we'll be talking to Salt Lake City Police Chief Mike Brown about something very near and dear to his heart, And our History Minute is about a famous silent actor named Max Swain. But first, let's start with our legislative update and look back. The City Council has been working hard on its priorities for the 2017 state legislative session. Some priorities include funding for homeless facilities and services, affordable housing, watershed protection, internet sales tax, and more. Eve Winterfest returned to downtown Salt Lake City to ring in the new year with a 20-foot wide mirror ball drop. The multi-day celebration of art and culture featured events and activities for the entire family, ranging from bounce houses to live entertainment, laser shows, and more. Where Children Sleep is a new exhibit at the Leonardo, which reveals a series of photographs of children and their bedrooms from many different countries and circumstances. Mayor Biskupski attended the opening press event where she spoke about the importance of partnerships in addressing housing needs in the city. Salt Lake City and the Economic Development Corporation of Utah announced national outdoor products company Big Agnes, who produces award-winning sleeping bags and tents, will be expanding its operation along the Wasatch Front. The company's new domestic distribution center will be located at 1810 South, 4370 West in Salt Lake City. Making sure Salt Lake City is a welcoming city is a top priority here. Salt Lake City Police Chief Mike Brown talks to us about his department's commitment to ensuring safety for all residents.
Immigration is a hot topic right now, not only nationally, but locally here in Salt Lake City. And I have to say, following the election, we had some of our communities, some of our immigrant communities, very fearful and scared. And wondering what was going to happen with the immigration policies nationally as well as locally here in Salt Lake City. And so one thing that we've done very strong and very open and transparent is that we will not change our immigration policy. We will not go out and do federal immigration enforcement. I think that's important to tell those people who are actually keeping their kids home from school, that are afraid to really ask these important questions. And so I think as far as a police department and a city, we need to get out in front of this and let them know that, number one, we won't enforce it, and number two, we shouldn't enforce it. I mean, when you really think about it, immigration enforcement is a civil issue. It's a civil matter. Can you imagine your police department going out and enforcing tax laws? Well, it's almost the same. Why would we go out and enforce immigration? So, with that being said, we have worked so hard to develop trust and confidence within the communities, all communities here in Salt Lake City, and especially the immigrant communities. So if we were to go out and even hint that we were going to enforce immigration, that would destroy that trust and that confidence that we have worked so hard to build. If anybody has questions, if anybody is living in fear, if anybody needs to be reassured, I want them to know they can call me personally. They can call Chief Mike Brown. I will take their call. I will meet with them. We can have meetings. We can meet with our communities. We can set up meetings wherever you want to sit down and talk about this very important issue. I just want people to know that their chief and their police department stands behind them, and we're here to protect and serve all communities within Salt Lake City.
And now it's time for our History Minute.
Born in Salt Lake City in 1876, Moroni Mac Swain took an early interest in the theatrical arts. At the age of 6, he created his own show called Mac Swain's Mammoth Minstrels. At 8, he stole all of the linens in the house to create his own circus tent. By 15, he ran away